Moved.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Bryn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So this brings us to the end of the Liquor Control Board agenda. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Aurora. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. So it's 6:23.
Progress.
I will call to order this regular meeting of the Winooski City Council. First up is agenda review. Any concerns about the order of this evening's agenda?
I was actually wondering if it might make sense to switch items F and G so we can talk about what's going on with the housing initiative as it stands before we speak about the position.
Anyone have any concerns about this?
No.
I think that's appropriate.
All right, Laura, would you like to make a motion to swap items F and G?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Aurora, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Switch those two out. Thank you. So we are public comments. So this item is reserved for comments and questions on topics not included in this evening's agenda. If you are here for an item on the agenda, please wait as we reach that item. We do open public comment for every item on the agenda. With that, please use the raise hand or chat feature if there is any public comment, or if you're in the room, please raise your hand or step up to the microphone. Okay. Seeing no public comment, we'll move to the consent agenda. We have our City Council and Liquor Control minutes from December 5th and a council payable warrant December 8th. Any questions, concerns on the consent agenda? Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Brent, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Was that, did all three of you say aye? So, okay, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so we are on council reports. Can I start with Brenton?
Sure. I sat in on the Planning Commission meeting this past Thursday. It was a very full agenda, so we didn't get to everything. We discussed initially the historic preservation incentives. There was no concern from the commissioners on that. There will be some move from where it is, from section 4, I think further down into section 4.12 or another later section that addresses incentives is more inclusive of additional incentives. So no concerns from the commission on what was proposed there. And we moved into talking about shared parking incentives, and right now it's set for 10,000 square feet. And the commissioners said that they were interested in seeing what a tiered approach might be, considering what retail space has gone in the last year to 2 years has been much lower than that. So, so that they were willing to look at some additional options for shared parking as an incentive for developers. And then we ran out of time. So the next meeting will be in January. Eric Vorwald reminded us that the remote meeting authorization from the legislature is winding down, so that I believe all meetings moving forward need to be at least hybrid or in person. So thought that was good to emphasize and make sure all the counselors were aware of that. And then this week we have a municipal infrastructure meeting. Since historic preservation is actually one of the items underneath the infrastructure portion of the master plan, we'll be offering an opportunity for commissioners to provide some feedback on that, the proposed incentives from the Planning Commission. We're going to go over the work plan because we've actually been talking mostly about the budget the last two meetings we've had in October and November. So we're a little behind in that. And then if we have time, we might talk about some multifamily and renter based energy efficiency incentives and opportunities that the city might be able to support as part of housing quality. So we'll see how far we get. Again, a packed agenda and lots of discussion for each of those items. So hopefully we have some public interest. Welcome everybody that wants to comment ahead of time to email me or to join in person at the pool this Thursday at 6:30.
Thank you. Jim?
Yes, thank you. To start, I'm going to share that I won't be seeking re-election this year in town meeting day. So I wanted to let the community know that so that there's plenty of time for folks who might be interested to step up. This is a fantastic job and a hard one to leave, but it is time for me to stop running for city council. So I wanted to share that news for folks so that they're aware. And I'll have more to say at another time. So I attended the Housing Commission meeting last Thursday. It was off-cycle, unusual meeting because we had technological challenges, and I apologize to members of the public that weren't able to join our Zoom meeting. But I will provide a very full update to the community through our council liaison update. The commission discussed down payment assistance application that we'll review in a little while. We looked at timelines for other activities such as just cause eviction and other policy priorities, and in particular spent some time talking about what information the commission would like on just cause evictions. There was a request for legal language that fits the charter and what that might look like, exploration of what the city's responsibilities would be in enforcement or staff costs, specific data for Winooski that would better support assessment of need and the type of program that we would need, and so in an interest to continue having those discussions on just cause eviction. And there's also a petition being circulated for charter change that may play into this as well. There's also interest in continuing to discuss the security deposit being held in interest-bearing account and housing board of review. And those items also, so similar to what Burlington has, a housing board of review, and what that could look like for Winooski. So those were other interests shared by commission members and could be brought up in the future if we have additional housing capacity come on staff to support that policy work. We spent the bulk of the time talking about the changes to the housing quality ordinance. This is a multi-meeting effort by the Housing Commission to address several sections of ordinance and fees that relate to how we inspect for housing quality and life and health safety issues. The commission walked through one of the relevant chapters, the public building registry, and talked in depth about some staff recommended changes to resolve issues of subjectivity, issues around inspection cycles, and issues around equity between the different types of properties and how we can kind of bring all of our properties up to the same inspection standard. So there was a good walkthrough, good discussion, and I think a charge for staff to move forward. And we'll be meeting at our next meeting to discuss the other relevant chapter, which is the name of which is escaping me at the moment. So there's one other chapter that we will spend time with. Sorry, our housing chapter. Sorry, thank you, Elaine. There's also a discussion about the Housing Initiative Director, which I'll save for our conversation later in the meeting. And our next two meetings conflict with holidays or existing city council meetings. So the Housing Commission will be meeting sometime in January, not on a Monday, probably not on a Wednesday. And we will be figuring that date out soon, but that will make sure that meeting date is noticed, at least the meeting date is posted soon so that people know when that Housing Commission meeting will happen. And that is all I have.
Thank you. Aurora?
Last week we had our meeting of the Inclusion and Belonging Commission, which was a really productive meeting. In addition to the ambassadors kind of checking in with each other and sharing updates from the commissions they are ambassadors to, the commission talked about thinking about its own ground rules / a community agreement because it is a slightly different structure from our other commissions. The commission has decided to have doing a trial run with having a chair and secretary who will have a 3-month term before kind of checking in on how that's going, which is a little different from what they were thinking of previously, which was a rotating chair. So still exploring how to best create a kind of an equitable and inclusive structure within the commission itself. Also discussed was the equity audit, and specifically thinking about ways that there can be action steps and the ways those action steps can be communicated to the Winooski community at large. And it was packed agenda for this, so the commission usually meets every other month on the even months, but is planning on having a special meeting on January 12th, most likely at 6 p.m., specifically to talk about the final 2 agenda items from the December meeting, which is how to engage people in understanding the proposed budget, as well as speaking more about kind of ARPA languages and connecting with folks around that, because those items are very timely. So we look for more information on that. And then tomorrow, we have the next Safe, Healthy, Connected People meeting, and that will be at 6:30 via Zoom if anyone wants to join.
Thank you for that. I have only one update to share. Friday morning, I'll be joining Burlington Mayor Weinberger in an event with our share of state legislators to share legislative priorities, which hopefully we are approving later on tonight's agenda. Councilors, I think you're invited to that, but I will double check the calendar appointment to make sure that you know when and where that is if you wish to attend. And with that, we will move to council updates and pass it to Elaine.
Thank you. So, city updates for today, December 12th, 2022. As you know, we are continuing the fiscal year 2024 budget committee meetings tonight. Budget meetings tonight. Community members are encouraged to get engaged in the process. To see the full budget and meeting schedule, please visit winooskivt.gov/FY24. If you have questions, please contact us at 802-655-6410 or budget@winooskivt.gov, or get in touch with me or any of your counselors. Today we promoted our annual winter parking ban reminder. If you haven't yet, please sign up for our winter parking ban alerts by texting Winooski to 888-777 or by visiting winooskivt.gov/parking. As we head into the holiday months, the city of Winooski encourages our residents and visitors to do everything you can to prevent the spread of COVID-19. More COVID-19 illness is to be expected as people are spending more time gathering indoors. To learn more about vaccines, testing, masks, and other resources, please visit winooskivt.gov/COVID-19. Test kits are available for free at City Hall, the library, and the Senior Center during regular working hours. Speaking of which, the Vermont Health Equity Initiative is hosting free BIPOC vaccination clinics in culturally affirming spaces that offer education and language interpretation resources for community members and their households. No proof of insurance or identification is required to receive care. Community members can get the bivalent vaccine for ages 5 and over and the flu vaccine for anybody aged under 65. The dates are December 17th and January 7th from 9 to 11 a.m. And the site is the Cathedral Church of St. Paul at 2 Cherry Street in Burlington. Updates from the Winooski School District that might be of interest for folks. Bus transportation to and from school for students living 0.75 of a mile from the campus kicked off this week. Actually, it was last week. Drivers and riders are still adjusting to their routes, and the district is hopeful for consistent pickup and drop-off times. The district also wants community members to know that they're continuing the driver hiring and training process in order to expand bus routes, and are currently focused on the students who live the farthest distances. They are hoping to have more drivers by the end of the month. The second and last school district announcement is the Vermont Agency of Education has released an application to help build the newly formed Family Engagement Council. This council is intended to advise the Secretary of Education on policy and topics of interest to parents in Vermont. Winooski parents of younger children, parents in non-traditional families, and grandparents or other relatives that act as primary caregivers are especially encouraged to apply. To do so, please see the latest edition of the school district email updates or contact the Winooski School District offices for assistance. And finally, a heads up to council. The building at 72 West Spring Street that experienced that fire this weekend has been deemed unstable, and there is a high risk of further collapse, especially in the event of a heavy snow, such as forecasted for this Friday. So, and it appears as of late today that the owner does not have insurance, nor do they have resources to mitigate the risk. Therefore, the city will likely move forward with demolition to protect public health and safety, which will require use of fund balance. However, we do not have those quotes available to make that request today. So we'll be likely using our emergency procedures to approve that work timely, and you would see the actual request after the fact to affirm that. Just so you know, the cost will, so you have some sense, the cost will include for a demolition contractor, disposable waste, which might include consideration that it is all asbestos. We don't know that for a fact, but we might assume that, or we might have to do it that way. And environmental assessment and or supervision of removal, bless you, as well as state and local demo permits. That's all. That was enough.
Thank you, Elaine. Jim, you have a question?
I just wanted, that reminded me that in my housing update, I didn't comment on the fact that the chief and Fire Marshal Palmer managed to put together a significantly sophisticated and robust set of recommendations after dealing with the multiple fires last week. And I really do want to acknowledge that was no small feat. And that was one of the most productive sessions that we've had at the Housing Commission in a while. And I appreciated that the chief and Fire Marshal Palmer put that time in and made that effort. So thank you for that on top of everything else.
Mayor, if I might mention something. So we do have a community cleanup fund that we have access to through Trinidad Solid Waste District. So depending on the expense of the disposal fees, we likely have some money to pull from in our balance to offset the revenue that would otherwise, the reserve funds that would otherwise be needed.
I'll check in with you about that. That's interesting. We would be putting a lien on the property, so I wonder how that would interrelate. But thanks for that. We'll follow up.
Okay.
Thank you all. So let's move into our regular items. Up first for discussion is the FY24 budget presentation for the community services department. Ray will be with us.
All right, give me just a second to get set up here. Stole my thunder a little bit. Excellent. Well, super excited to be here. Before I jump in, I do want to just give a couple quick preemptive acknowledgments. Angela Eldiari, our finance director, who is waiting in the wings to kick me virtually if I say anything correctly. And Elaine, both were super helpful in putting this presentation together, and certainly to my staff, who I will butter up further down the line. But this is very much a team effort that you're going to hear about tonight, and just want to kind of express my gratitude to that crew for making this possible. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to set some quick context, well, not quick, context. I'm trying to answer a number of questions that have come in kind of preemptively from counselors around some details about staffing, who does what, what our programming levels look like. And then we'll dive into highlighting some recent investments that the city's made in our community and subsequent outcomes, and then get into the fiscal year 24 budget. So I've got a few scheduled pause points here. I love what I do and can talk ad nauseum about it, so if at any point I'm banging on and you need me to stop, I trust this group will throw something or let me know, but I'm very excited to present tonight. So as mentioned, I do want to give my staff a quick shout out. This is not everybody, but is a great photo of a good chunk of my team. Again, they make the work possible day in and day out and go out of their way to serve this community and make it a great place to live and recreate. So I just want to really appreciate them as a group. They make my job really awesome and easy. So appreciation to them for that. And in terms of who those people are and what they do. So I'm going to go in through each section, but wanted to kind of show a quick overview of the department and the org chart. This is largely unchanged from last year. There have been a few iterations of this over time, in particular around the recreation and parks area, where we had briefly tried to tease out recreation and parks separately into two part-time roles and found that hiring and retention for part-time positions was really challenging there. And we were also having some difficulties with recreation, most of our recreation programming happening in those facilities, and so that disconnect was actually creating some inefficiencies. So we kind of squeezed those two positions back into a full-time rec and parks manager. But again, largely unchanged from last year's budget presentation. So starting with the Children and Family Programs Manager, I'm just going to work kind of left to right here. So that is the position that manages our Thrive program primarily. So the main points that I want to make around that position, we are running a regulated, state-regulated licensed childcare program through Thrive, and that comes with a lot of regulatory oversight and expectation. And so in addition to the sort of day-to-day of just being prepared to manage the number of kids that we do, there's a lot of nuance around paperwork, documentation, and even little things like how we take kids to the bathroom that have to happen in a very particular way based on state regulations. I'm here to say that's a good thing. I think that those are in place to help our kids to be safe and help our programs to run professionally, but it does add an element of requirement on the director of that role, of that position. Throughout the year, lots of training and support for staff. We've been really fortunate in Thrive, and I'm knocking wood, to have a very consistent staff team, but as new folks have come on this fall, we've had quite a bit of training that's had to go into supporting those staff to get up to speed. And again, they have to be ready to help us implement those regulations as well. So as much as Claudine is responsible ultimately for making sure it's happening, all of those support staff have to be involved as well. And again, there's a lot of program planning that happens in the course of the Thrive program. So every day we try to have activities scaffolded and set up for kids. And there's time and energy that goes into making sure we've got a plan, we've got the supplies, and have staff that are ready to run those programs. And then in terms of the direct service staff, the program assistants, they're really the boots on the ground, working with kids, playing with kids, making sure that we are keeping kids happy, safe, and enjoying their time with us in Thrive. I say that not to oversimplify what they do, because they do really fantastic work. And this is an interesting place where I am not only a manager of this program, but a customer of it as well. And it's really cool to see, my own children enjoying this and connecting with those staff. The other night, my wife tried to go pick up my oldest early, and she's like, "No, I want to stay." And as much as that was a pain for our family, it's a great kind of vote of confidence from the customer base that they're doing a great job. So again, recreation and parks. I'm going to use a sports metaphor because I'm a sucker for those, but I've always really viewed rec and parks as the center fielder that's covering the spaces in between left and right fielder that are otherwise kind of uncovered. So there's a lot of places where the rec and parks team is running programming that you might look at on the surface and say, that's a senior program, or shouldn't Claudine and Thrive be running that early childhood piece? But it's really trying to add capacity and flesh out our offerings across the board. And again, Robin and her team really do kind of ebb and flow between a lot of different spheres. So within Robin's role as Rec and Parks Manager, certainly planning and implementing a year-round calendar of programming, making sure that that's meeting community needs and interests. In that regard, we are going to be coming out early in the new year with a community needs and interest survey around programming as we start to look towards future program planning. We're about 4.5 years removed from our last one, so it's time for us to re-up that. Again, lots of training and management of staff. These are often positions where we see turnover, in some cases like AmeriCorps by design, and others in lifeguarding where they're seasonal roles, and so we're bringing on new folks pretty frequently, so lots of time going in there. Definitely a lot of work with partner agencies, and you'll hear a little bit more about this later on the programming side, but we're a pretty small rec team and can't do it all ourselves, and so there's definitely an effort to figure out those experts and partner agencies in the community that we can bring in and bring to bear for residents so they can get a wider array of program access. For all of these staff, lots of work and support around registration, and I will say this is something we've really leaned into this year in terms of the amount of time and effort we're putting into that process. We could very easily open registration online, let folks who can get on a computer and sign themselves up and pay with a credit card get first go. And my team has really made an effort to kind of bifurcate that registration process so that there is that online option for the first half of seats in all of our programs. But the second half we reserve for paper registration, which just by virtue of the amount of touch points takes longer. And those are often being filled out by folks who have limited English proficiency, may have multiple working parents, may not have computer access. So it's really been a concerted effort to more equitably deliver programs, and it takes a lot of time and effort. There's a lot more touch points, so it's something that we've put a lot of energy into this year. Also want to mention, again, we'll get into more details, the Myers Pool. That's not an insignificant amount of the rec team's work over the course of the year. Obviously consolidated in the summer months, but summer is a really busy time for rec, and the pool is a big part of that. And then the other piece that I think, Recreation and Parks is intentionally titled in that order because we did really want to emphasize recreation and programs and the opportunities for people to engage. Parks is also part of that, and so there's a lot of work there. Daily operations, everything from trail maintenance to cleaning up encampments that may happen to dealing with identified safety issues. We just met with a arborist last week about a dangling branch. So a lot of those just kind of day-to-day pieces that need to be dealt with. And then obviously too, we have this beautiful Parks and Open Space plan, 20-year plan that we're trying to move towards implementing. So that's another piece of this team's work. In terms of how these folks break down, just quickly, Rec Assistant and AmeriCorps Youth Programs Coordinator are primarily frontline service delivery staff. I will say the Rec Assistant tends to do more support around program planning, but by and large, those three folks are very focused on direct service. And that then allows our Rec and Parks Manager to spend more time focused on program planning, resource acquisition, and then some of the other pieces I mentioned around the pool and parks. Senior programs.
Wait, sorry, before you move
yeah.
on, I saw a raised hand.
Oh, great. Thanks, Christine. I'm not doing a great job paying attention to that, so keep me honest.
Hi, Ray. This is Marielle Matthews with Winooski for
Hey.
Partnership for Prevention. I'm just wondering if you can move the microphone a little bit closer, because I'm having some trouble understanding you.
Is that better?
A little bit.
Is that better?
Can move it
Here,
closer.
please? Let's try it. Let's try it.
Okay.
It's been
You want me to
satisfying.
grab
Thank
it?
you.
Like so?
There is one mic in here that doesn't work as well. I'm wondering if that's yours.
Here, I'll grab my extra one from.
Plenty of extra ones from the council.
Yeah,
too.
exactly. I'll take yours, Christine.
Double mic you.
All right, is that better? Excellent. Okay. Thanks, Marielle. All right. So Senior Programs Manager, again, largely managing the operations of the Winooski Senior Center. through programming. So that includes both drop-in hours that are there 3 days a week, where we're kind of open to the public. Folks can come in, get a cup of coffee. There's often sort of coffee chat type programming there. A lot of support around partner programs as well. So the Bone Builders group, which has been really super active and growing, which is awesome. Some work to help kind of get the word out and get the space prepped for that. Work with the Meals on Wheels program, AARP, Age Well. So a lot of partner agency work there. Certainly, and I'll talk a little bit more about program outreach in a minute, but definitely a unique population in terms of how we are outreaching, and definitely some additional work there around creating a print newsletter, going into the Winooski Housing Authority buildings with materials, and then distributing things through our More Than a Meal program, which happens weekly and serves about 100 seniors with a sort of grab and go meal. And that was a COVID development that we've had good success with, and so we've stuck with, because it's, we went from 10 folks at a congregate meal in person to 100 people a week through the grab and go. So that's been a really nice kind of outcome of COVID, if you can have a nice outcome of COVID. And then also client communication, so work with wellness checks, phone calls, just checking in on folks, so-and-so didn't show up this week to get their meal, calling in to see what's going on, make sure that we have touch points with community members as well. And then a fair bit with building maintenance around just kind of setup, breakdown, preparing for the various programs that are happening in that space. And then there are those larger events, pumpkins, voting, where we kind of come in and take over. And so Barb kind of works to help support those pieces as well. And as a reminder, Barb is a 28-hour employee, not full-time. So she's the lone employee there. And then the library, so collection development and circulation, weekly open hours for the community, reference support, a regular schedule of programming happening there, and increasingly youth programming. Kirsten's done a fabulous job of growing that program slate for us. And then a lot of outreach work too. Nate and Kirsten have been great about connecting with Housing Authority, Our Lady of Providence. They go up to Thrive once a week for a story hour. And then with working with various childcare centers in the community as well. So I think they collectively, and Amanda before, have done a good job of like getting outside the walls of the building with library services. And that's definitely something we are wanting to do. All right. Me, Community Services Director. So main items on my plate, managing and supporting staff, including training and hiring, budget management, compliance with plans and regulations, interfacing with city leadership and other departments, capital plan oversight in terms of the portions that are related to parks and rec facilities. And then it is not uncommon to see me supporting direct service as well. If anyone's been to the pool or has kids in Thrive, I try to help out where we have gaps as well. So that's another piece that, depending on our staffing levels and what's going on, can be not an insignificant portion of what I'm doing. And then 2 positions here, one of which I'll talk about in detail, one of which I'm going to wait to talk about a little bit further down the line. Our admin and outreach coordinator, which is a position that's come on board through the ESSER contract. I can't say enough about how valuable this position has been to our department as a whole. This is, in addition to me, the one other person that's really working across the department every day and providing support. So there are the basic admin functions of having a person to answer the phone for us, return phone calls, schedule meetings, make sure our supply levels are there. But I think there's so much more that Zara is doing week to week. She's played a really critical role in terms of our outreach and connections in the community. She's been working recently with Paul to help us develop a citywide approach to using WhatsApp. We've started in our community, or in our department, to dabble there, but really working to help create a better, broader approach that's consistent and valuable in terms of reaching people where they are. Lots of work supporting, especially multilingual clients with registration. Zara has multiple languages herself, and that's been hugely helpful there. Maintenance of the website, the calendar, things that are often those afterthoughts that you get home and you're eating dinner with your family and you're like, oh, rats, I forgot to do that administrative task. And so it's really nice to have someone who is thinking about that.
The other piece that Zara is really going to be stepping into, and this is sort of burgeoning coming, and I don't want to say out of COVID because we're not out of COVID, but into this next phase, is kind of reestablishing our volunteer program, which had really gone pretty dormant during the early COVID years. So Zara's position is also going to be responsible for overseeing a lot of the volunteer management program for us, which historically had been managed by an AmeriCorps member. So, so that is Zara and the admin and outreach coordinator. And I'll talk more about youth interventionist down the line.
Ray, did you mention space use?
Did I mention?
Space use, that Zara's enabling?
Oh, no, I did not. Thank you. Yeah, so Zara has also been our point of contact for rentals and space usage at the O'Brien Center, which we're seeing start to grow again since the departure of North End Studios from that space. So that's also a big one. Thank you. All right, I'm going to pause. There were definitely questions about sort of who does what, and I just wanted to make sure that I laid that groundwork. It was probably a little bit thick, but any questions on the staffing levels or who does what?
At the moment.
Okay. All right.
Are you gonna get to programming later?
Yes. In fact, right
If
now.
I can make one comment that I'd like to revisit in the future, and that's seeing this chart, identifying the roles that were ESSER funded, because some of these we added through that grant.
Yes. Yep. So later on, there is a slide that specifies which of those positions were and currently are ESSER funded, but I'm happy to update that org chart and I can send that through Elaine. Yeah. So speaking of programs, a couple things to mention here. And again, in response to some questions we got in advance. First and foremost, I want to remind counselors and the community, you can always go on to the city's website and find the current slate of programs on the city website. And in addition, I mentioned Barb's kind of unique population in terms of outreach. She also does a regular monthly newsletter that goes out to the community through various channels that has sort of a print copy of what she's got going on. One thing I will say is that Civic Rec, which is our platform where we do our online rec management and that plugs into our website, the senior center programming is not all captured there. And that's been slow to pick up, partially because our audience there has not historically been hugely focused on getting information online. We are trying to move forward with that, and that's a place too where Zara is actually going to be helping work with Barb to get more of our programs uploaded there. So stay tuned. So when you go on now, just know that the senior programs listed on the website is not everything at the moment. And then from a program planning perspective, and this is just to kind of answer a question preemptively about, if you're cutting staffing, what does that mean for which programs get cut? It's a little bit of a tricky question to answer now. And I say that in that we are typically planning our programs about a season in advance. So we operate more or less on a 4-season programming cycle, summer, spring, winter, fall, or fall, winter. And, for instance, my hope for our department is that most of our summer programming will be pretty well buttoned up and ready to promote by the end of January, and then fall programming by the end of the spring. So we're always, more or less a quarter in advance. And so there are some bread and butter programs that we know we're going to continue to focus on offering, Thrive being one. Obviously, regular hours at the library, our meals programs through the senior center, camps during vacation, our youth soccer program, which has been really popular, community gardens. Some of those things we know are going to be sort of steady and static. And so I think as we start to talk about potential staff reductions, it's the extra new different stuff that is probably going to be where you see that impact. I'm really going to try to stay focused on those core programs and making sure that we can keep those going. But where folks may see some of those adjustments is, I'm going to use it for instance, the climbing program we've been running through ESSER. Super popular. Every time we open it up, it fills like within a day. It serves a relatively small number of kids. It's a pretty expensive program for us to run. And so I think but we've had it like constantly throughout ESSER because it's been so popular. So I think one of the things in the face of reduced staffing that you might see is like, we'll offer climbing twice a year and really try to like pare that down, because the cost for, entrance to the climbing gym, the van to get kids to and from, the staffing hours that go into it makes that a pretty expensive program for us to run. So again, it's a little hard to say, like, these are definitely the programs you're going to see cut if we cut staff. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that process of how we kind of plan in advance. Over the last year, we've run about 200 unique programs, and that's across the department. So that's, again, library, pool, rec, senior center. And again, with a reduction of staffing as projected, we would likely see a reduction, in particular in the recreation arena for programming. So all right, I'm going to pause there, make sure I was clear.
That's helpful, Ray. That was the kind of context I was looking for.
Perfect. Okay.
She can't see him.
Oh, sorry, Mayor. Elaine has her hand up.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so, Ray, are you gonna talk about, what you traditionally would have tried to do with programming? Or do you want me to do that? I'll
You
do
can
it.
you can lead me.
I'll do it. So, traditionally, I mean, just today, Ray sat in my office and said, I mean, we would try to offer those programs, we would supplement, and then we talked about the fact that Ray and Robin's time cards this summer during peak pool, peak summer programming was regularly
It's pushing
60 to 70, 80 hours a week.
Yeah, pushing 60 pretty consistently.
Okay,
For both of
60
us.
hours per week for many weeks in a row. So throughout the season. So that means Ray and Robin are not doing leadership. They're not planning. They're not being strategic. They're not trying to get ahead of issues. They're not planning ahead. So when we've tried, this is an example of where we've subsidized less funding in the past through leadership sacrificing a leadership role. So I just wanted to use that as an illustration. So I explicitly told them we're not doing that this year. Let's try that out and see what happens.
Yeah, and that is captured later in the.
Okay.
But thank you for making that point.
If I may, I'm really glad that you called that out. I think that's really important and something that I at least, and I think the rest of the council would get behind. Like, we don't want staff working in that way. And Ray, the programs that you called out, Thrive, Soccer, Meals, Community Gardens, those are the programs that we've seen consistently year to year.
Yep.
People really value, and we should be thoughtful about, with climbing or these other new things, like what really is the return on the investment? What are the key things that we can offer that will engage many parts of our community? So
Yep.
I think it's what you've shared is a smart approach to working within our means and not trying to stretch above and beyond what we can deliver.
Yep. All right, I'm going to keep moving on. So I do want to highlight before I get into the proposed budget. This community has made some significant investment in the community services realm over the last number of years, and wanted to really, I think, number one, acknowledge and appreciate that, but also, really kind of spell out that we're delivering outcomes for the community based on those investments. So there's a number of things here that I wanted to kind of go through and just kind of highlight in that realm. So some recent investments in community services, in particular recreation, and again through ESSER. The ESSER program has injected a significant amount of resource into our department in the last 2 years. And I think as a snapshot, last summer, during the months of June, July, and August, we ran 81 programs, served 700 individual youth, 9 weeks of summer camp, 96 kids signing up for those camps. All that programming was delivered for Winooski residents for free. And as a comparative, that's a threefold increase over 2019, which was the last sort of pre-COVID summer that we had. So yes, we got a lot of resource brought on board financially, and we cranked out a lot of programming and served a ton of folks with that. So I think the point being, those investments are being put, to good use and are showing outcomes for the community. Again, 2,500 enrollments for ESSER programs. And I think, I can't remember if I shared this data point with you all, but this one really struck me, is that for the programs where we're tracking registration preemptively, 86% of our seats are filling up. So I know, Bryn, you've asked before about like program success and things that are working and not. This tells me that we're hitting some chords with the community and putting things out there that they're responding to. And again, when there are programs that are not working, we're not going to continue to try to push that through. Usually we'll give it maybe 2 goes, and if it's really not working, then we'll move on and try something new. And then also I think this is a good data point too, but 94% of respondents, we've started doing for every program we run a post-program survey. And 94 of those responding have said good or excellent for how they, kind of rate the program 4 or 5 stars. So that also is a really affirming data point for us as we look at those responses. Again, acknowledging that that is not the panacea of every participant, but for the data that we're getting back, it's good. I think rec too, I just want to make this point. Recreation is a critical component of the intervention work we're doing with the community and the equity work that we are doing with the community. I think this is I often say the front door that brings a lot of folks into the fold for us. And so, I could see very easily looking at, soccer, whatever, like kids kicking a ball around, no big deal. This is where we are making those connections and getting those kids to sign up then for the next program or connect with that family that is suddenly struggling and needs a support. And so I think that continuing to find ways to use rec programs to build community, build spaces, build places where people can be together and connect is really critical as we think about our master plan and the goals of our equity audit as well. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think some of the other pieces are a little bit more specific, and rec sometimes is kind of, again, that center fielder, right? It's kind of floating all over the place, but I think a day at the pool will show you that this is where community is happening. So I just wanted to make that point here. Speaking of the pool, these are some data points that were shared with the commission just as a season summary, and also with you through the quarterly update on Safe, Healthy, Connected. So I'm not going to belabor these, but I think overall, big jump in usage this summer in terms of day use and swimmers there, open swim. And pass sales were up, which is really encouraging and exciting to see in year 2. So, and I think I mentioned the program numbers being lower. Really, I feel confident saying hiring your rec director 2 weeks before the pool opens makes it really hard for programs to launch and run successfully. So I think that we will see those numbers bounce back this coming summer with Robin having the luxury of more than 2 weeks to do all that work. So.
Ray, we have
there's a hand raised in the audience.
Oh.
Hello. Hi. This is Andy Blanchett. I just wanted to quickly ask, because I know that we're talking about the budget, we're obviously having to talk a little bit about things that have to be trimmed, but I just noticed that there were a lot of, kids at the pool kind of all day, every day last year, who maybe didn't bring food for probably multiple reasons. And I was just wondering if there has been any discussion about getting some meals to the pool for kids that are there as free meals.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually do work with the Winooski School District and have meals available, free meals available on site for kids under 18. So those are there. We've got a refrigerator behind the desk, and as kids and families are coming in, we're asking if they would like a meal. So great observation and absolutely correct. And that's something we try to adjust to by having that available there.
Cool. Thank you so much, Ray.
Yeah. All right. I also need to give my wife photo credit for this because she'll be mad at me if I don't. So Thrive, this one I think, in a lot of ways speaks for itself. Again, enrollment numbers have jumped a lot since the beginning of COVID, but obviously with the first summer of COVID, I think being sort of a suppressed programming time, I wanted to have that pre-COVID comparative. And so we're up about 200% from pre-COVID levels in terms of our summer program. So we've seen a big jump, and I think a big part of that has been the ability to make that program free for Winooski residents through our support with ESSER. So I think that's really told us something, that making that program free has really eliminated a significant barrier for some of the participants that we were seeing. We averaged about 63 kids per week this summer in program there, which our max is 64. So we were basically right up at the cap pretty much every week. And Thrive After School, we have not actually tapped any ESSER funding to support, other than a small portion of Claudine's hours over the course of the year. That's a program that has, for the most part, been running sustainably for us in terms of dollars in meeting the staffing costs and programming costs during the course of the school year. So Thrive Summer is the place where, largely because of the length of the day and the amount of staff time that goes into that, we've not been able to financially float. So I just wanted to make that note that Thrive After School has not been ESSER supported. And I think, Thrive is a critical program for working families, single parent families, folks that really need that continuum of care after school. Again, I can say as a working, two working parent household, there are some days that it would be really tricky for us to get there to get our kiddos. And I think that is not a unique example. I think there's a lot of folks in program that have that as well. All right.
Brenda, do you have comparative enrollment numbers for after school?
I could definitely get them. I don't have them right at my fingertips, but I can definitely get them. We are definitely up for sure. I can say that confidently, but I'll get you the exact numbers.
Did we remove the fee on that as well?
No, that
Okay.
continues to be fee-based, but we're seeing higher levels of enrollment than we were pre-COVID.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And one note there too, so when I say free, we are a state licensed program, so any family that is looking for financial support is asked to apply for subsidy as a first step. So families can draw support from the state to cover the costs. So we are trying to bring in that outside resource and then backfill where the families are either not eligible or partially eligible for state support. The library, I think many of you are, I know, familiar with the library and regular users there. I think some exciting data here. I gotta make sure I got it. There we go. I've been seeing these data points kind of month to month, but it was neat to see it in a continuum. So again, 725 new library cards since the beginning of July 2021, about 42 a month, which for a community of our size is a pretty awesome number. Average of about 600 visits a month in person. And then I think the other thing that I wanted to really highlight here is the reference question piece. The programs are great, the digital and in-person circulation is great. I think the work that our team does around providing sort of quote unquote reference support is really phenomenal. And, in talking to them preparing for this report, I think that the type and complexity of reference questions that we're getting has really increased over time. And Nate was saying that in the past it would have been, what's the capital of Kazakhstan, or what's the average rent in the very data specific things, which I think in the age of Google is like much easier for folks to get. And so now these reference questions are more complex. I'm a person who's unhoused. What resources are available to me? I think a great example of this the other day that Kirsten shared was a CCB student who was trying desperately to finish their end of semester work. English was not their primary language, and Kirsten spent 2 afternoons one-on-one supporting that person in the library space to help them achieve their kind of work for their end of semester stuff. That's the type of example where that was multiple hours of very hands-on support for a patron, not, hey, where's the newest Louise Penny book? So reference questions is kind of a funny library term that both of those things would be considered a reference question. But anyway, I wanted to share that example. And then just another kind of shout out. So Kirsten has been also taking courses to learn Swahili and just shared with Eileen and our HR manager and myself a really cool update on just some of the very early ways that she's starting to see that manifest, building connections with kids that are coming in who have that as a primary language. And comically, I think it seems like they're concerned about swearing in front of her now in Swahili, which is also sort of an unintended benefit of that. But just that's the kind of level of investment that these staff are putting into their work, because that's not obviously a required thing that we're asking of her.
Before you move on,
Yeah.
We have an audience question.
Yeah.
Mary, I think you're on.
Am I on? Hi, Ray, it's Mary.
Hey, Mary.
I have been working at the library a lot more lately because of a permanent staff member who is on leave. And going back to what you said in regard to the rec department doing the sort of frontline equity and inclusion work, I plug the library into that equation too. I've seen, as you were giving Kirsten's example, the kind of help and one-on-one support that librarians give to members of the community absolutely are what I would call equity and inclusion work.
Yep.
That's a lot of what goes on there, and I put the library in with the rec department as a place that really does that frontline work. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary. And totally agree.
And I know that the library had pop-up tables at other events and at the farmers market throughout the year too. So making those extra steps to be, I'd say, kind of outside the library walls as well.
Yep. And then wanted to just highlight too, it's not quite a recent investment, but I think it's a recent adjustment that is worthy of note in that we were, in the last year, Angela, our former equity director, Yaz Gordon, and I worked to update our scholarship procedure to make it more accessible and reduce some barriers. And we saw requests triple year over year. And that is in an environment where most of our youth programming at this point is being offered free of charge. So I bring that forward to say, number one, I think there's a clear need in the community for scholarship accessibility. Number two, and you'll see this later as an emerging issue, like this is something that I'm keeping an eye on because I think that this demand is going to grow as we revert to some fee-based programming. And also just wanted to highlight that there's been a lot of questions about like fundraising and sort of outside fund seeking. We are definitely doing that at the moment, are funneling those resources directly into the scholarship fund, and are planning in January a more coordinated campaign around sort of preempting the pool pass sales that'll start likely in February. So you'll see an ask more formally in the community right after the new year. There's also a pickleball tournament coming up January 28th, which will be a fundraiser for the scholarship pool. So I think at the moment, that's where we're really focusing our energies around fundraising. So just wanted to highlight that as it relates to the scholarship
I
program.
just wanted to mention that usually there's a year-end vote for donations, so it's captured within the tax year.
Yep.
So
We could definitely try to move that up a little bit. For obvious reasons, this has been sort of front and center for me, but
obviously.
yeah, no, it's a good thought for sure. All right. So those are some recent investments. I don't know if there are any other questions before we move on to next year's proposal. All right.
I don't see anything else.
Onward. All right, so here it is. So a few things that are included in this budget that I wanted to specifically call out. So we are proposing to move the Senior Center program budget into the general fund. This is similar to what we've done in recent years for both the Thrive program and the Recreation program. They had been managed previously in special revenue funds outside the general fund. And I think what we're finding is that our ability to keep those programs sustainable in terms of dollars in meeting dollars out has been challenged by our ability to charge for programming. And so we are proposing to bring the senior center fully into the general fund. Right now, there's a small amount of programming money and staff that are in the general fund, and then almost all of our programming budget has been managed outside the general fund. We post-COVID, again, not post-COVID, at this iteration of COVID, are not planning to bring bingo back to the senior center for a host of reasons. That was initially stopped because of COVID and just obviously not getting large groups of people together. But we've seen a significant drop in our volunteer team that had supported that. A lot of folks that have aged to a point where they're not going to be available for us. Some concerns around fraud risk that have been sort of always there as you're handling lots of cash week in and week out, and especially with volunteers. And then also some concerns around the state law that limit the amount of time an organization can pay a staff person to run a bingo game. And especially with the loss of those volunteers, feeling like we're going to have a really hard time not being afoul of that with Barb's time if we return to that. So that's the primary driver of why this budget is suddenly not sustainable. In the past, the resources that were coming in through bingo were able to support most of the programming costs that were coming out. So
pausing there.
Yeah.
Is, with bringing the volunteer program back, is that something that would be included as part of that, or would that be kind of a lower priority?
So we had not planned to bring bingo back in terms of kind of reestablishing that volunteer group.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was not part of the game plan at the moment. Any other questions on this one?
One comment about this, this has come up repeatedly from senior citizens, members of our community who were involved before the center became a city function.
Yep.
And that's just, we'll want to make it clear, there's like some reserve funding that came with that, right? And we'll just want to make it clear to that group that that money stays allocated to senior programming.
Yep, and you'll see that later on when we'll do a quick slide on the reserves for the department, and that's captured there. But thank you for calling that out, Christine.
And then just a clarification, because this is what I assume, I just want to make sure that it's clear, is that it's 11,540 net impact after the offsetting revenue.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. All right. And then again, Christine, to your earlier question, a number of staff positions that had been funded by ESSER thus far are being proposed to be retained in the general fund moving forward. And again, in response to the great success, the strong response from the community, this was something we felt like was level service that we wanted to continue forward despite the ESSER contract winding down after this coming summer. So these are the positions that are currently in the proposed general fund budget that at the moment in fiscal year 23 are ESSER funded, and in fiscal year 24 would be funded through the general fund. So again, full-time admin and outreach coordinator, the full-time recreation assistant position, one library circulation assistant, and then a portion of Claudine's time in the children and family programs manager role. And then there are some small, well, I shouldn't say, there are some increases in the contract and supply lines as well that have come along with ESSER that have been in response to the increased slate of programs. So.
Thanks for this, Ray. So what I do want to say is that when we did our budget goal setting meeting, my recollection is that as council, we said continuation of ESSER funded programming was not level service. And so I want to make sure that these pieces are reflected in the Excel sheet we received for modeling. And for me, what I want to think about from what you shared, I'm not sure what follow-up information I'll need, but is, were we to not continue any of these, what would the impact be? And I also want to call out, because this came up in last week's meeting, that the youth intervention position also was was expanded through ESSER. And
Correct.
So when we say that we're reducing the hour, or like reducing that staff position, it's back to pre-ESSER. It's not, I don't know, it's not really to say that that's a reduction in level services.
Right.
Except,
Mayor Elaine has a comment.
Yeah.
so there actually wasn't 100% consensus, Mayor, on whether or not ESSER positions would be considered level services. So this is our recommendation. We included some and we cut some. So part of cutting some is level services, because we didn't see that 10 to 12, well, I ultimately decided that 10 to 12 hours to support 1 to 2 people at a time, compared to what that money would be paying for supporting recreation programs that would serve more people and serve some sort of level of intervention role for more people, that it wasn't worth it. So I actually cut the entire position in the recommended budget, just to be clear about that. Do I need
The
to
youth
clarify?
intervention position?
Correct.
Oh, that was not my understanding from last week.
And that's the next slide. So I don't know if I'm happy to jump to that if that would be a helpful transition to the youth interventionist piece, because these were sort of the two big pieces that were, and I guess to your point, Christine, these are sort of the new pieces, new and different pieces that I wanted to call out in this budget. So to your point, these weren't general fund funded, they were ESSER funded. So in that regard, they are new items. It's a level service from the last 2 years, but new to the general fund, if that makes sense.
I think considering too that, as noted, there's an increase in population in Winooski too, so thinking about the needs have expanded and that these positions are trying to account for that in a lot of ways too. So it's hard to talk about level service when we have had an increase in population and an increase in diverse needs of our residents as well that these positions are supporting.
Yeah.
Aurora, that's very fair, but what I want us to be clear about going forward in the future is when we're using grant money to expand on like operational capacity, that we need to be really thoughtful about those decisions, because we end up, here we are reaching the end of this grant period, and now there's a lot of, we've sort of set an expectation that this is level service when it wasn't to begin with. But so we just need to make sure that, and this slide is helpful, like when we say level service, these are actually additions to the general fund, and they're going to be increases to the tax rate. We just need to be clear about that when we're communicating about the budget.
Mayor, can I add, I also have that recollection of our budget setting discussion, but also when we originally approved these ESSER positions, that was the conversation that that the previous council had, that this is an expansion of service that isn't expected to persist forever. And I think that I agree with your point, Councilor Hurd, and I also think that that's true across other departments, that adding 2.5 FTE is a lot for any department, and that those needs impact public safety and municipal infrastructure and housing as well, and our community and economic development needs. So I think if we were to put this in alongside all the other pieces that we're having to weigh, for example, ending a grant-funded equity director position as well, like where is the greatest need for new positions? And I don't disagree that there's need here, and it's clear that the impact matched the resources. It's actually wonderful to have the experiment of what if we added and what do we get. And I think it's been clear that this is not only brought us more, but it's been done really effectively. And I want to applaud that. And it's really hard to think about where this reduction needs to come from, but it is hard to see this kind of we're trying to set the expectation with the community and with ourselves that we're going to maintain these positions only during the grant period, and we're at the end of the grant period, and that's going to be hard. So I think it's hard in this case. It's hard for any grant-funded positions that we add.
I wonder the community members who've been engaged through these programs who weren't engaged in that initial discussion though. So thinking about the equity and inclusion part of it too, that we've brought in a lot of folks through these positions to trust the city and to be a part of the city and to be able to receive services and get the support that they need. So I feel like that should be considered as well if we're thinking about equity and inclusion, is who was included in those, who might have been left out in those initial discussions too.
And I think that is a good lens to apply to considering the recommended budget where there are undercuts.
Yep. So in terms of, Christine, maybe to your question specifically about potential impact if these went away, I can try to work with Elaine to come up with, a good way to articulate that. Again, some of them are a little tricky, like I think of the admin position, which has such a broad scope. It's going to be a little bit hard to articulate, but I think we can definitely do our best to come up with, projected impacts of what that would look like.
Well, and the context you shared tonight is helpful for me to reflect on and thinking about that, and I'll touch base with Elaine too before you spend time trying to produce something new. Thank you.
Yep. I'll stand by.
Mayor, if I might say something. Given the conversation and comments that we just had, I do think it's very important moving forward that if we're creating a program that is grant-based, that does have a certain timeline on it, that part of that plan is how are we going to fund this? So part of the initial conversation is when the grant ends, how are we going to fund this? Not so we get through the end of the grant and then it's like, oh, how are we going to fund this?
Yeah.
So that part of the conversation and part of the planning is that kind of built up. And granted, like some of the programs are pilot programs, but I still think it doesn't hurt to have that built into, where would we pull from this? What type of additional tax rate would be needed to continue this if it does achieve the success that we're hoping that it does? So that way there's less of a tension when we get to the end of the grant period.
Yep. And I think to be clear, looking at, again, I mentioned this earlier, I think moving or kind of reverting to a more fee-based programming model is definitely something we've known was going to be a reality of the sort of post-ESSER time period for us. I think what's tricky and what I'm still trying to wrestle with is I've been frankly flabbergasted by how much of a response we've seen by reducing cost. I knew that pricing was a barrier in this community, and I don't think I had any idea how much of a barrier it was, Thrive Summer being a great example. So I think my sort of oversimplified mental model of like, oh, we'll just, we'll beef up our scholarship program and we'll get back to fee-based programming and everything will be hunky-dory. I'm really having to flip that construct on my head a bit too. And so I think that we are going to have to get creative in terms of how we close that gap. Because I don't think we're going to be able to do it on the backs of enrollment fees.
And I don't know that it's either or, but it might be a sliding scale, it might be a hybrid. So, I mean, ESSER programs as well as the pool,
Yep. No, these are all really good questions, and I think certainly things we're wrestling with for sure. And so in terms of things that are not included, and I guess to your point, Christine, this title may be a misnomer because it's things that are not included, I guess is how I should say this, versus cut in light of that comment about where the source funding was for this. But regardless, not included in the upcoming budget, the youth interventionist position. So, we've talked about, for the most part throughout the year, carrying a caseload at any time of 4 to 5 kids. That has definitely ebbed and flowed based on what the complexity of the situation is with anybody we're working with. As you can see here, the types of interventions that we've provided over time are really varied. Could be as simple, and I shouldn't say simple, as straightforward as academic support or the need for a weekly mentoring meeting with a kid, all the way up to, working on pretty complicated truancy interventions with family systems and dynamics that are causing challenges for kids to get to school. In one particular case, went so far as helping navigate the housing authority system to get a family connected and onboarded into new housing. That was a really critical stress point for that child. So it's one of those positions that's kind of your Swiss Army knife of intervention, and it's been really incredible to see the work that's happening here, the depth to which it's happening, and the way that it's making impacts. You know, 2 stories I want to share. One, so this is going to tie everything kind of together, but we had a child come on board through scholarship into our soccer program. Unfortunately, was having some real challenges behaviorally at soccer. Jenny at the time, who was the rec director and the coach, brought Francine into the mix, had a meeting with this child, kind of tried to work through what was going on, worked with that kid to do restorative processes with his teammates, supported the coach and our staff in keeping this kid in program. This is a child who is now, you know, at soccer every week, shows up with a smile, ready to go. And what was really cool is recently he just accomplished an incentive with Francine and his work with her, and asked as his gift or whatever at the end to spend a day with her at the library. And that was just like, okay, we did it. Like, this is amazing. So like, that's the type of full circle work that I think our department is doing, and that I think this position specifically helped facilitate. Another example is a recently hired Thrive assistant, actually, who is a senior at Winooski High School. That all started from a conversation on the basketball court behind the O'Brien Center, where a kid came up and said, you know, I want to get plugged into something positive. I really would love to find work. I'm trying to move towards college. Like, help me out. And here we are 6 months later with this person on staff as a city employee, working with younger kids and doing a fabulous job. So that type of like depth of service and support would not have been there to get that kid from point A to point B, in the absence of this position. So again, I'm happy to answer questions more specifically here, but I wanted to make sure too to really iterate or make a point, like, this is not a cut we like. This is a budgetary move, and it's an attempt to get that number down. So to be clear, this is not an operational decision that is one we feel great about. This is in response to a need to get a budget number lowered. And I know that that's the challenge we're all up against, but I wanted to make that really clear from our operational perspective, that this is a position we see great value in terms of being able to do really deep, meaningful work with community members that need that.
If you
Thanks.
pause.
We have a question from a member of the audience.
Yep.
But I did want to reiterate for anyone who wasn't here last week that these are really hard decisions that you all are making.
Yep.
That doesn't go unrecognized or unappreciated. And we are not decision making this evening.
Correct.
We're familiar with the process. We are deep diving each of these department budgets for the next couple of meetings, and then later in January, we'll actually deliberate and make final decisions.
Thanks, Mayor. I just have a quick question, Ray.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's kind of similar to what the mayor was asking with those previous positions, just like, you know, if in your estimate, kind of what do you think would be lost without this program? And I also totally understand that there are no good decisions that get to be made right now.
Right.
It's great, and I respect that. But I'm also just curious, in addition to that, you know, could you give us some information as the public and, you know, council, like, what are the demographics of the folks that are being served? Because as you mentioned, with taking away these entry fees for programs, there was a significant change, and that tells you something about the demographics of the city. So I'm just curious to be able to share something. Thanks, Ray.
Yeah, of course. So I'll start maybe with the youth interventionist position and then back up to the other kind of more programming focused. You know, I think what's lost here is I think our ability to really get in and do a deep dive when we are coming upon or connecting with youth that are struggling, which we are on a regular basis in our programs. You know, we, again, by virtue of the number of kids we're serving and the variety of ways that, you know, we are serving them, we are seeing things in the community and are, I think, in the absence of the youth interventionist position, down a really important resource in terms of being able to help those kids and families navigate complex systems, move to get the supports that they need, and provide that sort of ongoing case management. You know, as again, it's 4 to 5 kids at any given time. So far in the last year or so, it's been about 34 different individuals. So I guess what's lost there again is our ability to sort of really get in and support engagement, participation, continued involvement, and help again navigate some of these complicated systems that families are then left to navigate on their own. I will say we definitely, if this position goes away, we'll be thinking about how to try to build partnerships to allow us to have sort of referral relationships with agencies that do similar work, you know, a Spectrum, Centerpoint, Howard Center. So I do think that some work will have to happen there so that we continue to have a place to send referrals. But I think you lose that Winooski touch, you lose that localness and that sort of familiarity that, again, I think those stories about the kid that went from soccer to incentive day at the library, like those are going to be fewer and farther between is what I would say. And in terms of the support positions for programming,
Oh,
you
right,
know.
can I interrupt you?
Oh yeah, please.
So another point is that those 34, that caseload of 34 people in the last year, that was, or since the beginning of fiscal year 2022, that's at 28 hours a week.
Correct.
So we don't have 28 hours a week after ESSER grant ends. It would be 10 to 12 hours a week. So what we would be losing from cutting the position altogether, as I've recommended with great dislike, is 10 to 12 hours worth of caseload in FY24.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the consensus there was, you know, more or less 1 or 2 clients at a time. I think hiring for that position becomes really challenging, and unfortunately the work requires a degree of flexibility that 10 to 12 hours a week I'm not sure supports. You know, you've got to be ready to meet clients when they're ready, where they're ready, and if you're trying to do this as a side hustle, I think it's really it's a challenging hire for sure. Not impossible, but difficult. And then I think on the programming side, so one thing I think, and this is some work that we need to do internally as a department, we don't currently track demographic data when we're doing registration. And that was a conscious choice initially as a means of reducing perceived barriers to enrollment. Where it has left us, unfortunately, is with an absence of that data. So I want to do some work with some thought partners around that and figure out some ways that we can start to track that and more formally. What I can say informally, and this is being a resident, having kids in the school, having been around the block for a little bit, the diversity of participants in our programs under ESSER has ballooned. We are seeing tons of new American kids, tons of families for whom English is not a primary language, ton of kids that we weren't seeing before enrolled. We were seeing them a lot in the community, but we were not seeing them engaging and enrolling in formal programming. And so these changes and these updates, the reduction of that fee has really allowed us to do work directly with a lot more kids. And that's been awesome. So I think that, you know, Andy, to your question, I think is something that would be lost to a degree with some of these positions going away. You know, it's scalable to a point, but I think our ability to do that work would be diminished. All right. So again, I think this will be a similar song here. We are proposing the reduction of one of our 2 AmeriCorps positions. Typically, given that those positions are working towards a set number of hours and have a degree of administrative work through AmeriCorps that is required, we're estimating it's about 30 hours of service time to residents per week that would be lost. And that represents about 21% of our rec team staff hours in a given week. I think back to the earlier point around program planning, it's hard to say that's going to be a straight line reduction of 20% of programs, because I do think that we will try to get creative, build partnerships, find ways to supplement. But the reality is that when you take away staff doing direct service work, there will be a reduction in direct service programming. I think that's just a reality. It's a little hard for me to say directly, like, these are the programs that are going away, or this percentage of our programming will be going away. But as best as we can estimate, I would say it's probably about, roughly 20% of our programming capacity would be lost with the reduction of this position.
So it's also been shared, sorry to jump in.
Yep.
That it's getting more and more challenging to find AmeriCorps positions. So
That is true.
in theory, like the amount of, how much labor hours are going into attracting, training.
Yep.
And that's a 12-month position, so
Right.
you're doing that same amount of recruitment orientation year over year.
Yep.
So is there an estimate of how many staff hours might be saved by not going through the recruiting orientation process?
That's a great question. So one of the requirements of AmeriCorps and something that we structure in departmentally is an hour a week of direct supervision time. So I think obviously up front, there's more kind of training, hand-holding support that's needed. Over time that diminishes as folks get more comfortable, learn the ropes, learn the communities. But I think that hour a week of supervision time is a pretty safe estimate of savings of staff time over the course of the year.
What about up front?
Up front, I will say it really depends, quite honestly, on the person coming in. We've had years with AmeriCorps members coming in from the local community who know the area, have housing, have worked in some cases in neighboring schools. The amount of upfront work there is way different than somebody who's moving here from out of state, trying to find housing, trying to figure out the community and the culture, trying to build connections with people. So I don't know. Probably a couple additional hours a week up front for the first 3 months, maybe. So I think the amount of invested time is worth the outcome at the end. I think we net positive is what I would say. But I think your point is well taken that
No, it's just
there's some training time.
And not necessarily trying to make a point, just trying to get a gauge on
Totally.
what hours of yours or others does that free up? That could be applied to leadership teams. So if you're working 60, 70 hours a week during peak season and it doesn't, and so, not having any sense for that gives a gauge.
Right. I think fortunately and unfortunately to your question, by and large, we're bringing AmeriCorps members on in the fall. And so they're kind of coming on as the summer is winding down. And so by the time our busy season hits the next year, theoretically, they're at their most functional point. And so I think the timing hasn't been bad in terms of a typical recruiting cycle.
Okay.
This year has been really, it's terrifying to say this out loud. This is my 18th year supervising AmeriCorps members. This is hands down the worst recruitment year I've ever seen. We finally now have 2 offers out, and I think they're both going to stick for folks to begin in January. Mm-hmm. But typically by now, our AmeriCorps members have 3 to 4 months of service time under their belt. Mm-hmm. So it's a really weird recruitment environment for AmeriCorps. I don't know how much of that is a blip, how much of that will adjust. We're seeing them make some adjustments to living stipends that they're paying out, which I think is part of the issue with recruitment right now. But so I guess to your question though, the busiest times for us are not the times when we're putting in the most labor around training.
Gotcha.
And I think the flip side of that is if we lose those direct service hours in the summer, then suddenly, I'm checking people out at the pool desk a lot more. Robin is in camp every day, all day. So we really go into defensive staffing where we're, our leadership staff are on the front lines.
That's
and
all
again,
context.
everything gets deferred for 3 months.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask, kind of going off of that, and apologies, this is going almost back a little bit, but how much of your and Robin's time is saved by having an admin and outreach coordinator, by having someone who's able to update the website and able to help register and able to do all of that heavy lifting so you don't have to?
It's significant. I think if you lump, and again, this is not something we've done a formal desktop audit of, so I just want to this is me speculating a little bit, but if you lump, outreach, so thinking about website management, calendar, and when I say calendar, I mean out-facing calendars, not internal calendars, coordination of space use, van use, supply purchasing, help with registration, which again, dependent on the family, can be a pretty hands-on process. I would say easily a day a week, if not more, between the two of us is saved. And again, unfortunately, those tend to be the tasks that get pushed to the end of the list at the end of the day. And so then suddenly it's been, 3 weeks and we haven't put anything out on social media. Our website is out of date. So I think there's things that as Zara gets more and more comfortable with those systems, we're seeing improved efficiency and service. And then that's allowing for Robin and I to do more of the high level work in a given week.
Thank you.
Does that answer?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's very helpful.
All right. And then the last thing I just want to highlight here, it's a pretty small number, but I think it bears calling out, is the proposed budget is a level funding budget for books and materials for the library. And that represents a reduction from the requested budget by the department of about $1,700. That increase came from the fact that about a third of our circulated materials now are digital, and the cost for those digital materials is on average, about 30% higher than print materials. And so that's where that $1,700 number came from. A couple things I think worth noting here, digital materials, unlike a book, when you buy a book, barring somebody taking it and not bringing it back, it's yours for as long as you want to circulate it. Digital materials, and it varies, but have renewal requirements. And so there's sort of a compounding effect here where we're going to want to have a digital copy of Harry Potter probably forever, right? Like those are books that we know are going to continue to get checked out over and over and over and over again. So every 2 years now, we're having to go back and renew those digital licenses for that material. And then new material that comes on to keep the collection current and fresh and relevant for patrons is getting kind of added on top. So there's definitely a lot of weeding that happens. Nate and Kirsten do a ton of work around looking at what's the community responding to, where can we go, through interlibrary loan for things. But the cost of library materials, I guess my point is kind of continuing to grow as we see a higher and higher percentage of digital content being circulated versus print material. So, again, not a huge number, but I think wanted to call that out.
Yeah. And that's something that's so outside of control. It goes into
Correct.
copyright law,
Correct.
which is unfortunately really weighed against library services.
Yep. So I'm going to pause here before I get to the numbers slide and to see if there are any questions. Christine, thank you for continuing to keep an eye on the digital space. Okay. Onward. So before, again, numbers come, this is just a slide I wanted to put up quickly. These are items that weren't included. They were things that were in the stretch budget but are not in the proposed budget. And I share those because partially they were shared during Elaine's, and I wanted to just highlight the pieces of that impact our operations and that are not being funded or not proposed to be funded, and to see if folks had any questions about any of these as excluded items. If not, we can move through.
I do have a number of things. I'm going to try and minimize some of my questions because I know I can get into more details with staff at a later time.
Mm-hmm.
So things that may be of most of interest are the O'Brien Center. So right now, the conversation has primarily been around space and rent for the library, but we utilize more than that. So
Correct.
is the stretch budget considering the additional space?
Yes. I'm gonna
So, Angela, I'm
there's
gonna
Angela.
tap you in here in a second. So it includes the community service department office space as well. I think the stretch budget includes the gym and maybe more square footage. Angela?
That
That's correct. The stretch budget was to expand beyond the footprint that we currently utilize. So within the net of expenses for the O'Brien Community Center, what we take in rents, we could cover rent for our existing spaces at a number that's been discussed with CHT previously.
And is there a point at which, other than the library, renting out that space, well, I guess that wouldn't really work, but never mind. I answered my own question. So thank you, that was good context, because I had originally had it in my head that we were only really considering the library, so thank you for the detail there.
Yep. Any other ones?
I see there's a hand online, but I also wanted to quickly ask, I see on here, and this is definitely something that I feel like has come up in our ARPA discussions as something that's very needed. I was just wondering if there have been like any specific thoughts, thinking about English language learning for adults, or if it's just, if we had the budget, we would find a way to make it work.
So, I've been talking to a lot of potential partners, the school district, St. Mike's, VSAC, Vermont Student Assistance Corporation, Vermont Community Foundation, USCRI, ALB, Mercy Connections, Vermont Adult Learning, and it wasn't just me. So Vermont St. Mike's had a student team working on trying to do a needs assessment, and they also talked to some of these partners, some with me, some without me. So what we're coming around to is the need for, as those of you who are in the listening sessions around ARPA heard with our multicultural liaison partners at the school, there's a need for more intensive English classes to get to proficiency, which would also mean that probably people need like a stipend, or I've been thinking about it like basic income, in order to be able to afford to spend more time learning English. So obviously we don't have, space to spare in our budget for this, I would say. So there's a couple ways I've been thinking about this. Potentially the Working Communities Challenge, I'd like to pitch it to the core team as something for the work plan. There is some money there. When I talked to Vermont Student Assistance Corporation, they thought it would be easy to fundraise for if we were working with an existing employer, because Department of Labor has a lot of workforce development funds. What would be harder, and what I'm more interested in, frankly, is, that's good and important and good. And we have a lot of talent in our New American community, which is locked up behind having to work for someone. So why couldn't they start a business on their own? It's harder to fundraise for that. But VSAC hasn't said it's impossible yet, so we've got a next meeting lined up with them to hopefully explore that. So there is nothing in the recommended budget for that program. We would have to find money for that.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. And I'll just take this opportunity. So it's probably confusing to many people that we are talking about stretch budget with no money attached to it, and not in the budget anywhere, recommended or otherwise. The reason why I chose to include these items is because we recognize as staff that the community has asked for progress on a lot of items that are reflected in the master plan that we are not making much progress on. We are making progress, to be clear. Staff has been working hard, as you can hopefully see. But there's more that we think that we could do if we had more money. And so we wanted to give you a flavor of some of those ideas for future context, and context for this year's budget as well. So that's why we've proposed them without any dollar amounts attached to them, for context.
All right.
And I think there was still a hand raised.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, so just to be clear, I just want to make sure I'm fully understanding. So the stretch budget items are things that, if able to, would be great to have, but at this point is not in the budget. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. So on to the numbers. So this is the Community Services Department roll-up for council, looking at a proposed budget of $1,180,000, $599.89. Thank you, Angela, for that level of detail. Overall, for our department, it represents a 3.1% increase over the fiscal year 23 budget. Staffing and benefits, which represents about 83% of our budget, as proposed here year over year, is about a 1%. It's 1.01% increase as proposed. So I think that is really important to call out, that is our biggest ticket item, and we have made a strong effort here to keep those numbers year over year in check. And then just a few pieces. So the specialty supplies as a percentage, you see a pretty big jump. That's mostly driven by the senior center program budget coming into the general fund. And then on the contract and professional services side, not a huge number, but the increase there is driven by increased cost for custodial for some of the library databases and some funding carried for lifeguard training. So happy to answer any questions on the numbers here.
Can you just mention about the line item for vehicles, equipment? So budget in 22 was 8,600. The actual was 35,000.
Yep. So we had a 15-passenger vehicle that was the words of our fleet manager, dubbed unsafe at all speeds. So that has been moved on through auction, and we're in the process right now. I have quotes in hand and hoping to make a purchase in the next week or two for a new 15-passenger vehicle. In the interim, for ESSER programming, we've been renting 2 minivans, which has been covered by ESSER, so the cost, there's revenue to cover the cost, but as an expense number has been a very high impact for us.
So would that passenger vehicle come out of capital?
Correct, yeah, and it's budgeted in the current year capital, that number will come back down to a more stabilized level for next year.
Because from here it looks like we're underfunding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I do think, current year actuals too, just to be clear, these actual numbers are from pretty early in the fiscal year. So that actual for fiscal year 23, again, is probably going to look pretty high, but there's offsetting revenue through ESSER. And again, once we get that purchase vehicle on board, we can stop renting minivans and that will be a lot cheaper.
Thanks.
So I just want to call this out because last meeting, there was a lot of talk about how our budget is a moral document and guides our values. And what we are seeing in this proposed budget is a doubling in size of community services since FY22. So this is showing real investment in that part of our services to the community, and I want to make sure that we carry that message forward if this is what we move forward.
And you'll see that increase started in FY23. FY23 was the first year where we budgeted for ESSER in both the revenue and expense side, because the ESSER did not start until after the start of FY22. So the increase year over year is related to ESSER.
Thank you for those points. All right, if there's not more questions here, I'll move on. Want to call out, and again, mentioned this earlier, but we as a department are trying really hard to offset these expenses. So from a leveraged funds perspective, on the left, that chart is a list of grants from fiscal year 22 that our department secured in support of our work. You'll see a lot of small numbers here, and that is sort of the nature of the beast a little bit when you're dealing with human service grants. But again, just wanted to reflect that we are out there trying to get grants, trying to support the work outside the general fund where we can. And also that point at the bottom, I think, again, for fiscal year 22, which is the last year we have closed, About 37% of our budget was offset by either grants coming in or program fees. So I think just want to make the point that we are really out there as a team seeking outside resources beyond taxes to support our work. I just think that's important context.
I have a question there.
Totally.
Do we already have any programs where, I mean, we talk about regional dispatch and leveraging resources within the county.
Yep.
Are we leveraging any other neighboring municipal services?
So I guess what I would say there is, so I'm a member of the VRPA executive board now at the state level. So there's a lot of work there happening to start to figure out shared training across rec departments regionally. Because right now, for instance, every spring I'm training lifeguards. Allie in Essex is training lifeguards. Brad in Essex Junction is training lifeguards. So trying to find a way to consolidate some of those for efficiency is definitely one thing we're looking at. And then we definitely work with and talk to our neighbors a lot. And more, I would say for us, it's like if Burlington is running a killer, well, this is not an example that's real, but like youth football program, we're probably not going to try to go and try to compete with that because we'd be better to partner and send our kids there. So we definitely are looking at those types of program partnerships,
Okay.
But not in the same sort of shared service scale that I think like a regional dispatch would be.
Okay.
But yeah, we're definitely plugged into the region as it's able to be plugged into at this point.
Because it almost seems like not for FY23, but there could be a model
Mhm.
that VRPA
Yep.
could look into where there's shared, like
Yeah.
leveraging some shared programming.
Yep.
And like, if you agree to be part of the partnership, then
Yep.
there's some
Savings.
reduced rates are there.
Yeah.
Savings.
Yep.
But
No,
that's
something to look at
another
for sure.
day.
All right. Any other questions on the outside funding piece here?
Can I ask a question about revenue?
Sure.
So I haven't gotten a clear sense of which programming you envision going back to fee-based and at what level, and
Yep.
Could you just speak a little bit to where this, like the rough outlines of where the 297K in revenue comes from?
Yep. So, and Angela, you can help me if I misspeak here, but as I'm remembering, there's about 184,000 of that, which comes through Thrive. And so we are projecting a return to fees for Thrive in totality, but with this, I think, a concerted effort for summer to create a really robust scholarship program. So then we were carrying, I believe, about 16 for recreation programs, and I'm looking at the screen at you, Angela, in case that number is off. And then the rest is, I think there's about 80,000 in pool fees as well. So passes, season passes and day passes. So I think those three chunks are kind of the primary driver of that 297 number.
Okay, thank you.
And that's inclusive of the pool rentals and
Correct.
Programming as well for like
Correct.
swim lessons and things like that.
Yep.
We have, I think, about 70,000 budgeted for day passes and season passes, and the rest of it is rental
Yep.
and lessons.
Thank you, Angela. All right. This is just, frankly, a personal exercise, but I just like to make sure we're keeping an even keel here. And so of the 13% of the general fund that the community services budget represents, on the left is the sort of breakdown interdepartmentally of what's what. So again, I think a pretty nice mix here of budget going into each of our areas of work. Again, mentioned earlier, Christine, this reserve fund for the department. So these are vestiges of when program special revenue budgets existed for a lot of our programming. So this bottom line number is what we track within our accounting, that 56,000. But because, like Christine mentioned, some of these funds had some strings attached, we also track them independently. So for instance, the library funding that's there, about 80, I think it's about 8,800 of that's still on the books, was from a bequest that was made a number of years ago by a community member that passed away. So we're tracking that separately, and that's earmarked for the library. And then the senior center funding, again, we've tracked separately in deference to funds that came on board when we took the senior center on as a city program officially, probably, gosh, about 8 years ago now, I think it was, that we did that. So, and then the community services one up front, just because that number is ugly, and I just want to mention what it is. So we used to run our recreation department through a special revenue fund. It never cash flowed, and so that's where that big negative number comes from. So for years, the special revenue funds, with the exception of the senior center and the library, that were flowing positively, were essentially supplementing that line item. So that's where that big negative number comes from. I don't know, Angela, if I did a adequate job of explaining the financial side of it, but.
That's fine, and there are internal things that we can do to cover that deficit. We've discussed internally covering it with Thrive balances and the youth programming, but we have not made definitive action on those things yet.
Yep. But long story short, there's about 56,000 in reserves that are there for community services. And those are kind of being held for those rainy day kind of opportunities that come up that might require a match, for instance, for a grant, or, you know, something happens dramatically within our landscape and we need to kind of plug a gap. So it's kind of our backup fund for community services a little bit. And then the remaining special revenue fund is the community garden. This one has historically, in my 10 years, been really reliably self-sustaining. You will see a negative number at the bottom presently. Unfortunately, last year, someone helped themselves to our greenhouse heater over the course of the winter. And so when we went in the spring to turn it on, it was not there. And so we had to replace that to the tune of about $3,000. So that was an unanticipated expense within this budget that over time will net positive in this program and rebuild that balance. But I just wanted to acknowledge that's why that number plunged into the negative so badly. That was an unfortunate discovery. And then finally, just some emerging issues. Again, I think we've spoken about a few of these or most of these, but obviously potential changes at the O'Brien Community Center, and I think similarly the St. Stephen's and Winooski Senior Center properties, and just kind of having some uncertainty about what's happening there for city functionality is something we're definitely working on and spending quite a bit of time on right now. Our return to fee-based programming and anticipated challenges there around need for support for scholarships, and then continue to make progress on the Parks and Open Space Plan in the absence of a formal parks capital budget. That is a tricky one. You will see momentarily that we are trying to go find some grants to do these little things here and there to kind of move the needle, but that's something that I think is going to continue to be an issue for us over time to try to continue to make progress there. And that is it. I want to thank everybody for the attention and the time, and the community for the ongoing support of our work. It is truly a privilege and a pleasure to work here for this city and for this community. And yeah, hopefully they answered questions, but if there are any lingering ones, happy to do that now or as they pop into your brain over the next couple weeks.
Thank you, Ray. Are there any final questions from members of the community? You can raise the hand or just chat picture. Any additional questions from council?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to just kind of come back to one point or thinking about the positions and the question that you had asked and how to frame that for a future conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Ray, you really touched on we saw some of the core programs that you feel like in retrenchment, like these are ones that you want to deliver on because they've been a rock, like a foundation of the community services offerings in the past.
Yep.
And I think in thinking about what it means to lose one or more of those other positions, like at what point do you retrench so far you can't even deliver the core programs? And I think that goes to your comment, Elaine, about not ending up with you and Robin doing 60 to 80 hours a week in the summer. How do we get to right-sized for what we were delivering before. So that's what I'd be interested in, is how those reductions would cross to core program delivery pre-ESSER.
Yep.
And also, building off of what you learned and developed through ESSER. That's not to say we can't change or adapt, but I think that would be the way I'd like to see some of that information framed, is its relationship to what we were offering before ESSER scaled up the department, and then how we would still maintain that at a more rational fund staffing level, if that makes sense.
I think it does.
Okay.
Rick?
So for Angela, on page 37 of the binder that you gave us, there's a line item under the senior center expenses for food supplies, and there's nothing there for FY22 or 23. But for FY24, it's indicated 17,800.
Yeah, so that is something that moved from the Fund 400 budget over into the general fund, and it is level funded from prior fiscal years. That is currently how we pay for the More Than a Meal program.
Could I encourage line item detailed questions to be handled through one-on-ones with staff versus public meeting?
However, I felt like this was significant enough because it was related to food and food insecurity. So that is why I raised it during this meeting.
Sure, thank you. Any more questions? Elaine, could I ask you to respond to some questions that we've received following your presentation last week?
Yes, sure thing. So I wanted to respond to Councilor Hurd's grant writer idea, to the extent that I've got some information today. So first I'll note that whether a grant covers a position or program expenses, it's still not guaranteed into the future, as we were discussing today. So if you want stable services, you really do need stable revenue. Generally, that's property taxes. In this case, we're lucky we actually have local options taxes as well. Community services grants often do require new programming and also don't tend to raise a lot of money, as Ray was just describing. To me, that would be back to needing staff capacity to implement. So grant support for that department wouldn't necessarily play out the way we'd want, which would be, increased capacity basically. For public works and economic development, some grant work we could contract out, so it might be a minimal staff lift, so it might make more sense some of the time for that. It does depend, however. Overall, we came up with a limited list of services that would make sense for Winooski to have grant writing support for. One example is charging stations. We would need extra capacity to apply for an electric vehicle charging station grant. So grant writing support for that would be, would be better suited to a contracted service as opposed to an ongoing paid staff position, because we just didn't come up with a lot of examples that would, that we could just contract out the work and it would be fine. So Councilor Oakleaf gathered a bunch of feedback from residents. There was a few comments about basically, around confusion around the budget process, how and when to engage, why your voice matters if you aren't close to the work and don't have enough insight to direct priorities. I'm glad you asked this question. I'm glad Councilor Oakleaf had raised this opportunity to discuss that. So there's 3 types of responses to that question generally. First, staff, council, I'd say commission members as well. We always welcome resident feedback any time of year on what's important to you and what you think Winooski should be doing. As I mentioned briefly in my presentation last week, that's really the big role for the community, is to set vision. So that just telling us what's important to you is a way to give us feedback on the budget once we get to that. I have been trying myself to meet everyone, and I know council stepped up, started back in their community engagement processes. So we're trying to get out there as leadership to meet with folks. We're especially trying to meet with folks that traditionally have been marginalized. So please feel free to reach out at any point. Don't feel like you need to have the perfect type of feedback. Just engage with us so we can start to understand what's important to you. And I want to appreciate that a couple people that provided public comment last week did reach out to me specifically to ask to review our priorities and even the budget potentially, and we are grateful for that. You can reach me at ewang, E-W-A-N-G, at winooskivt.gov. Paul, if I could trouble you to pop that in the chat, as well as the phone number. Second, at the same time, anyone who really wants to dig in, as I was trying to allude to, on why we are or are not recommending a specific position, cost, what have you, you're welcome to set up a meeting, especially with me and the finance director. We can review those with you so that you understand more clearly on the specifics, if that's where your interest is. And it's up to council whether they would want to offer that level of detail as well. Again, you can set up meetings with staff by emailing budget@winooskivt.gov, Paul, please again, or that same phone number. And third, we recognize that we could do a better job of engaging the public earlier in the budget process, so it doesn't feel like it's such a done deal by the time we get to these meetings. This was my first year through this budget process, so I wanted to see, as the manager, what's been done in the past before I went about trying to propose anything really new or different or disruptive. Next year, we are hoping to provide earlier engagement opportunities. We'll see how that works out. But that said, don't feel like you have to wait for us to figure that out. To offer those opportunities, reach out to us. And I recognize that it's staff's job to provide opportunities to make sure that people understand that, yes, this is, you're definitely welcome to raise your voice. Another question that came up from the public, if the tax rate increase is per month or for the year. The tax rate increases are for the year. Property taxes are billed quarterly, so you would be seeing the impact to your pocketbook quarterly. Why have the non-property tax revenues gone down? Those have decreased by a total of $317,965. I'm sorry, $317,965. There's three reasons. There's the loss of ESSER funding, as we've been discussing today, reduction from the Working Communities Challenge Grant for FY24, and that's because if we don't fill the equity director position, we're assuming we can't provide the programming that would draw down, enough programming to draw down the full amount of that grant. And then finally, the last year, council approved the use of just over $88,000 in fund balance to net the O'Brien Community Center to zero impact on the tax rate. So since we weren't able to fill the vacancy left by North End Studios and the future of the building was uncertain. That shows up, it looks like a revenue, even though it's fund balance, it's money that the city already has. That use of fund balance is not continued in FY24 in preparation for the city having to pay rent on the space, which would then need to be covered by taxes. And then some of these decreases were offset in revenue, were offset by anticipated growth in other normal operating revenues. There was a question on how much Winooski businesses pay into Winooski infrastructure. It's hard to break down exactly their share for infrastructure, but there's a lot of numbers, and I can share that if you're interested. But it comes down to they actually pay more proportionately in taxes than homeowners do. And those are the, yeah.
If I could add to that, Elaine, when we implemented local options tax, that was part of that entire conversation was that those taxes should support infrastructure, and then that's another way that businesses and residents are contributing.
Thank you. So I'll pause it there. There's other questions that I'm answering directly with council to email. These are the ones that I thought maybe more folks will be interested in, so I've reviewed them here. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any final questions or thoughts before we move on?
I just want to say thank you, Ray, for taking the time with us and going into the detail and the work that you and the department are doing. So
happy to
thank
do
you
it.
very much.
Couldn't hang out because I got 2 grants right in a row.
Well, I'm gonna pause you there though, Ray.
Yeah.
I would like to call a 5-minute recess, give us a little break before we shift into the rest of the agenda.
Yep.
I've got 8:26, so 8:31 on my clock. We will reconvene. So 8:33, we are on State Natural Resources Recreational Trails Program. Ray, are you still with us?
I am still here. So I think hopefully a fairly straightforward project scope. We're looking at doing both trailhead and on-trail signage improvements in a number of our city parks where we have recreational trails, and looking to apply for funds to support that. There's about a 20% match, not about, there is a 20% match for this that can come either through in-kind or cash. And so the cash requirements could be covered through the current Parks Capital Reserve fund should we be awarded the grant. So happy to answer any questions folks might have.
Any questions from council?
I just want to start by disclosing a potential perceived conflict of interest in this item. I am an employee of the Agency of Natural Resources, however, do not have any role in reviewing awarding decision or making awarding decisions on this grant program. So I don't believe I actually have a personal or financial conflict of interest, and I'll continue to vote on this unless anyone has any questions or concerns. Okay.
Thank you for raising that. Anyone else have a question or comment? Any questions from members of the public? Does someone want to make a motion to approve the ANR Recreational Trails Program grant application?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Aurora, second by Bryn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Ray.
Mm-hmm.
Item C, Vermont Department of Education 21st Century Community Learning Center grant.
Yeah, so we are up for our third renewal in my time here for the 5-year block grant from the Agency of Ed for 21C. This is a grant that's carried through the school district, but of which we are a sub-grantee and a co-writer. So we essentially bring match to the project to allow us to draw down as a community more funds from Agency of Ed. So our drawdown would be up to $26,000. And then we are required to do a 1-to-1 match there, which we typically cover through existing expenses related to the Thrive program. And then the Thrive attendance is allocated towards this grant as part of their reporting.
And Council, you may recall we approved the memorandum of understanding for this back in November.
Yeah.
Any questions?
No.
Members of the public? Any question or comment? Okay, do I have a motion to approve the 21st Century Community Learning Center grant?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Jen, second by Aurora. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are on to item D. This is on for discussion or approval of COVID-19 Recovery Nonprofit Grants Program, potential second round of funding. Elaine, you want to kick us off?
Sure, just in brief, at your November 7th meeting, you discussed whether to open a second round of nonprofit funding. You asked for this item back on your agenda once you had a clear picture of the fiscal year 24 proposed budget.
Thanks. And so the previous discussion, as I recall, we were thinking of potentially funding another round of grants, potentially to the tune of $30,000, which was not spent and initially allocated to the business side, the business grant program, but no longer is, right? That went back into our reserves.
Correct.
So the ask tonight is if we as council want to open in a second round of funding for this, or just not do that, kind of put it to bed for now.
I'm happy to start.
I can share with, go ahead.
My preference in looking at stretch budget items, line striping being one of them, traffic calming, we don't have a budget funding source for that. To me, those would take priority over reallocating money towards a nonprofit grant at this time.
Yeah, I also wanted to add, and I think you brought this to my attention originally, Brendan. The state legislature appropriated $40 million of their ARPA funding for community recovery and revitalization to businesses and nonprofits as well. So there is other new capacity out there too.
I'm supportive of not, or I would not support adding additional funding to the nonprofit program at this point.
I should share, sorry, go ahead, Aurora.
I was going to say, I don't know if this would take up too much staff time, but would there be a possibility of then promoting what the state has as information about that community recovery program?
Yeah, I mean,
boosting it.
just pushing information out, it wouldn't take that much.
Yeah, I shared it on my Mayor Social, which is not the same reach, and I'll pass along what I shared to Elaine for staff. I will say that Thomas, while he's not at the meeting tonight, he did send me some notes on a couple of items for this one. He said he would be open to another funding round, but at a lesser amount, maybe $20,000. But it sounds like in the room, we maybe do not wish to take action on this. Any questions or comments from members of the public?
And there's no one else in the room at this point.
Oh, good to know. Thank you. Okay.
Christine, before you move on, would you like to ask for a vote to continue, and then with the expectation that it would be voted down to provide clear direction and a recorded motion?
Yeah. Okay, because we have to vote in a positive. So I would entertain a motion to approve a second round of funding.
Sorry, point of order. You want to have a motion where no one votes yay?
Actually,
So,
but
no.
this would also work. Like if nobody makes the
Okay.
motion, then that's in the record as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, procedurally, the motion fails.
Was there?
Well, there was a motion, actually. Could
Yeah.
someone make a motion, and then if it doesn't get seconded, then it fails?
All right, I'll move that we approve a second round of funding at $30,000 for the COVID-19 Recovery Nonprofit Grant Program.
Motion by Jen. Do I hear a second? Motion fails.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your Robert's Rules complaint. So let's move on to item E, also on for discussion approval of the political sign procedure.
So again, at your November 7th meeting, you discussed conditions or restrictions for political signs and public rights-of-way that staff would apply in managing political signs and rights-of-way in the future. You agreed to postpone a decision to a later date to give candidates at that time, since they were running for the next day, time to provide input. I actually have not received any additional input since then.
I do not either.
But you did receive some at that time, which is summarized in your packet.
So, in your cover sheet, Elaine, and what was shared before was a suggestion about a time period, clarity of rights of way, and a number of signs in a certain area. And so we could hash out these conditions and move something like that forward. I also want to suggest what we had heard from one of our previous mayors, Mike O'Brien, about, I wrote this down. Okay, what he had shared was that hosting in any public rights of way was prohibited. That is prohibited, right? But that historically, the weekend before, there was no enforcement. So essentially it was, you can't do it at all. The weekend before an election, you can put them wherever you want, as many as you want. I don't know, I would look to staff how they feel about this first, but I would say that that would be an easier approach to this than having staff try to regulate for numbers and distances and that sort of thing.
That's true.
I might need a refresh of my memory from November. I think it's where it becomes a nuisance to the community, I think, after the election. And if there's a burden to city staff to clean up the signs, or to me, like if there's any impact to our waterways or our landscape, trees, parks, things like that. Like if it should warrant some type of fee or fine for not picking up your signs after the fact to whomever they belong to. Again, that takes some degree of enforcement, so there's city staff time that could go into it, but it could create a mechanism at least for the option to implement.
Right, so currently we have that authority provided by ordinance.
Okay.
And we haven't, to my understanding from the past two city managers, we haven't chosen to enforce that.
Okay.
Generally, we'll remove the day after, store them here so that, some people are running perennially, so they could pick it up for a future year. And then at the end of about a week, then we dispose of them altogether. So if there was what I would deem as the manager a nuisance amount and they don't pick it up, I might assess a fee, and that's allowed in the fee chapter.
So, Mayor, for further clarification, I feel like some of the interest in the matter came up because of the signs in the circle the weekend before the election, which would have been, was that a full 2 weekends before the election, was the Halloween event that we had?
Those signs, so there was what one may describe as a nuisance amount of signage around the Rotary Park. That was further than the weekend before.
Okay.
However, there is still the possibility that the weekend before could be Halloween in the park.
Yeah.
But the other issue was signs in public rights of way and public owned property, which implies endorsement, right? There's a reason to avoid that.
So, I'd be comfortable with allowing for signs in the public right of way the weekend before, but for the center circle, the public right of way in the center of the, like along the fencing.
Excluding Rotary Park.
Yeah, along the fencing of Rotary Park.
Well, and I feel like I would support just excluding them in any city-owned park. And that would include Rotary.
Okay, yeah, that's, feels reasonable as well.
We do have a question in the audience, but are there other comments from council?
I will share. I'm also comfortable with allowing them in rights of way during a defined period of time to create predictability for candidates and to create predictability for staff about what they're supposed to do. I think it's a reasonable policy decision to formalize. I would not want to see them in parks, and I think there could be. I also would encourage the staff to have a clause. I would think that we should have a clause that allows staff to remove it if it conflicts with another community interest. So if there is like an event that is going to be run by the city and it's going to be complicated by signs, like that should, I don't want you to have to not remove signs because you can, and then not be able to hold a parade or whatever it is. Like I can't coming up with bad examples, but that might be worth considering too, that the city could choose to remove signs during that window for other reasons if it serves a community interest. So that'd be something else to consider.
I think one thing too then is we have in here signs for nonprofits may be approved by the city manager. And I feel like, is that then would we see that as a separate procedure? Because then I see things as getting very complicated, because then can nonprofit signs, where can they be? Does it see as an endorsement? Sometimes nonprofits are promoting specific things that are on a ballot. How does that all balance out too? So I think I agree with the no advertising for any businesses is prohibited, but I see, yeah, kind of some, not quite sure how to handle the nonprofits in the various ways that might appear.
Yeah, I could see a not in parks sort of a thing. And, you know, I feel like there's enough, well, at least for me, there's enough direction provided in this conversation, assuming that it continues into a motion, that I could exercise some discretion and then build up a body of practices that could then be, you know, communicated consistently over subsequent years.
Okay. Sounds good.
Because some of them are like, they're sports teams. I mean, it would be good to have visibility for those because they're opportunities for the community, or, you know, other recreation programs. Like there was the Vermont Symphony Orchestra had, you know, signs out this year and we had to take them out, which seemed a little, you know, too bad. But right, if you're endorsing then it's more, if you're endorsing a particular item on the ballot, then that's linked to an election. And so then it could be treated more like campaigning. And yeah, so I can see being able to develop some consistency as long as you entrusted that discretion to the manager.
Sounds good.
Can we bring over Amy Blanchett from the... Hello.
Hi, I just had a question about the signs. So, the first question is, do typically around the circle, like prior to the weekend before an election, first of all, does this apply to any election? The second question is, before that weekend, does an entity need to get a permit? I was under the impression that that was kind of part of being able to put a sign on the circle before the weekend before an election was acquiring a permit. And just to plug that, I really enjoy seeing the signs around the circle, even though this past one maybe I saw more ones that perhaps I didn't support, but I enjoy seeing all the signs around the circle as it encourages Winooskians to participate in the election. But yeah, any insight on those two questions would be helpful. Thanks.
So the current ordinance does require people to request permission, but that hasn't been followed. There's been many years of, you know, of a certain practice, so it's understandable that people just didn't realize that was even required. I've forgotten the second question.
Just that this applies to, like, the weekend before an election. Does that apply only to, like, a November election, or does that apply to all elections?
So currently the prohibition is absolute. It's not allowed at all. So what the council will be discussing now is potentially a time period.
Thank you so much.
So it sounds like we are in favor of exclusion from parks, some case-by-case authority for the city manager to approve nonprofit signs, however. And to also remove from an approved area if there's a conflict with another city event. I think the question that remains is, what is the time window preceding the election that we are comfortable with? And do we want to delineate what's in the cover sheet here, right? No more than one sign within 50 feet of each other in public right-of-way, or just be loose about the weekend before. It's kind of a free-for-all, but not in the city park.
I know one thing that came up last time, and I feel a little bit more comfortable with it if we're thinking about kind of eliminating city parks, is what the state road rules were, which were the no more than 2 weeks prior to an election.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I appreciate it both being a way of free expression for campaigns, but I also, worry sometimes that campaigns with more funds are able to then get out more signs, and that can lead to its own inequity too. So I think that's something I have in mind too with kind of this conversation. But I wonder if tying it to something that is already in place, say with the state roads, might make it feel more comfortable to folks as well.
It'd be easier for them to manage too.
Yeah. So then you don't have to is this a state road? Is this a city road? How do we want to balance that?
So right now the procedure is no more than 2 weeks prior. Is that different from the state roads? Or are you saying that is
That
allowed,
is
so
the
you're,
state.
you're fine with
Yeah.
that? Okay, got it. Sorry.
Yeah.
I understand.
Do you have the state ones in front of you, Aurora? Do they have any explicitness about number of signs?
No, I have, I think what was referenced on November 7th, so I don't have that.
And I'm sure it's just it's very difficult to manage for that when you have lots and lots of miles of road. Staff's suggestion of that, I appreciate the mayor trying to look out for staff capacity and management of, is this 50 feet or not? Staff felt that what was proposed here, which would mean that we would only be acting if there was a complaint. Not that they have to go out and measure every day, anytime one pops up. But if there was a complaint, then we would have a very clear metric on a block-to-block basis of what our action was. Weighing that idea of campaigns with more money could put out more signs. And is that really what we're trying to do here? So it was a balance of those two things of manageability for staff and also trying to allow the point of the advertising to function, which is awareness of the public of candidates and issues.
I have a related question about the right-of-way enforcement. And I think this came up last time too. There's a lot of folks whose front yard actually, part of it is within the right-of-way. And when we give guidance to candidates saying you can't post in the right-of-way until, before the election, I know we have a map, a zoning map that will show you that, but I wonder if it is fair to say if you're behind the sidewalk, that is acceptable, that's your front yard. In front of the sidewalk, not acceptable.
That's a good generalization, but I would want to make sure that Public Works and Planning and Zoning generated the map as guidance so that I wasn't putting, getting someone in trouble by mistake.
There's also the challenge for roads that don't have sidewalks.
Correct.
Yeah. Well,
For ones that have, perhaps.
if the yard is touching your house without the interruption of public concrete.
I could say signs may be placed between a sidewalk and the street.
So I'm saying no. I think that's the delineation, is if you're between the sidewalk and the street, you've left the person's front yard.
Right, I'm saying that would be the condition. Signs may be placed between the sidewalk and the street, which would eliminate the no sidewalk zones, which applies house endorsement. So you can only put signs in the green belt. That would be the effect of that, right? Is that does that solve the issue?
I'm saying that that's not allowed, except during this period, this 2-week period before when we're saying it's fine in the right of way.
Yeah.
We don't have to address this now. I just know that's been a point of confusion, and where homeowner put a sign in their yard, what they believe to be their yard, and then it was removed because it was technically the right of way, even though it was behind the sidewalk. But it is 8:15 p.m., so it sounds like.
And Mayor, just pausing. So the first bullet, I just want to make sure there's clarity on campaign signs related to matters or candidates on the ballot. So that would have been a problem for me this last election because I was a write-in candidate.
For a matter on the ballot. Right? 'Cause that's
Or
how I-
candidates on the ballot, so.
I think we could change this to candidates, comma, or matters on the ballot.
Okay, that would help. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it sounds like there could be a motion to allow signs in public rights of way for campaign signs related to candidates or to matters on the ballot for no more than 2 weeks prior to an election and no more than 1 day after an election. Signs for nonprofits may be approved by the city manager. Any advertising for businesses is prohibited. There shall not be more than one sign from the same end of your campaign within 50 feet, etc. within this bullet. No signs are allowed in city parks without approval from the manager. Signs may be removed from the public right-of-way if there is a conflict with a community event as determined by the city manager. And signs that violate these conditions may be removed by city staff. And that we would operate in a complaint, reacting to complaints versus proactively having staff go measure and make sure that signs are within this parameters. Would someone like to motion that as our sign policy?
Procedure, please.
Procedure.
Thank you.
Sign procedure.
So moved.
I just had a question. Sorry. I will happily second the motion, but can we have discussion afterwards?
Yeah, let's do it now. We have a motion and a second. Let's have the discussion.
Okay. I just want to verify, just because I was looking at the Vermont Secretary of State rules, that town officials cannot summarily remove signs that violate local ordinances. Does our sign ordinance provide for the removal?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. Then that was the question.
Okay. So we have a motion by Aurora and a second by Jen. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Elaine, did you get all that?
I think so, and if not, we've got the recording, so.
Great. Okay. Let's move on to item F, which on the agenda was item G. This is on for discussion, the strategic vision area goal update for housing.
Yeah, so housing goal update. So we've made progress on some of our must-dos. The policy work support is a little delayed. The recommended items we have not made any progress on, and new ideas are a mixed bag. So as Deputy Mayor Duncan mentioned earlier, the public building registry ordinance work is finally underway. Staff presented proposed changes for Chapter 17, the public building registry, which really is how the primary way that the city helps support quality, safe housing for our community. Staff presented the proposed changes for that chapter to the Housing Commission on December 8th. The Housing Commission was generally supportive of the proposed changes. During their January meeting, they'll discuss further those changes, anything else residual from Chapter 17, and then, as Councilor Duncan mentioned, start reviewing staff proposed changes to Chapter 9 housing, which have to do enforcement once there's a violation found. So that is a significant piece that has been on the to-do list for some time, and staff is relieved that we're finally able to make some progress there. The other items would be advancing more quickly if we had filled the Housing Initiative Director position. As I mentioned last week, I decided to pause that once it became evident that I would be recommending a reduction in hours to make sure that we knew what we were advertising. And the reappraisal, which has nothing to do with the Housing Initiative Director, is going as planned. The assessor team is making progress on schedule, and no big complaints so far. Wait for your mail to find out when you will be next. Some of the recommended items are definitely suffering from a lack of Housing Initiative Director in terms of tenant-landlord connections, and other ways that we might be able to promote findings from the equity audit that have to do with housing.
If I may, I recently hosted staff from the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity on the Town Meeting TV in the World of Winooski show. So they have programs for housing supports for tenant and landlord education, and having follow-up conversations with them about how to get them connected to groups in our community. So we can still make some headway on that, with lack of, even though there's a lack of staff. I also wanted to say about the Plan and Post Citywide Housing Summit. We discussed this at the Commission Chairs meeting earlier this year, and it was clear to me that there wasn't a strong vision or goal for that effort. And I don't know, my feeling coming out of that conversation was that this actually should have been removed from our list. I don't know if others want to say.
I think I'd push back against that from the meetings I've had where I was discussing safe, healthy, connected people, as well as the combined meeting with the Safe, Healthy, Connected People and Housing Commission. I don't know if Jim would agree. But I think there is definitely an interest to explore. I could agree that maybe there isn't a strong vision, and that is probably due to the fact that we don't have, housing currently. That position is not filled, so we don't have that kind of dedicated staff support or expertise. But I definitely think there was an interest in something of this nature to have a conversation about the issue due to the fact that it is affecting so many residents.
Yeah, and my recollection of that item is that it came up, the idea of having a summit came up at a particular time with particular staff resources, and when the equity director departed and Heather departed, we did not have the staff to drive that agenda, and it was clear that the commission chairs didn't, or it seemed clear to me the commission chairs didn't feel they could drive it from their seat. So I think it is a staff capacity issue that then made it less relevant because there were other things that were going to be done specific to housing. We had the equity audit, we had this long-standing need for dealing with housing quality ordinances, and I personally felt that we made the right decision to move away from prioritizing a housing summit at this time because we didn't have the staff and we didn't have the exact need, and we had some things we could do to make headway on those needs without doing a summit. So I think when we talked about it at our policies and priorities, I remember it was still potentially of interest down the road, but very much if the conversations with the community and the evolving nature of staff and commissions leads to that being advantageous, that still might be worth revisiting, but I don't think it's a thing that we need to be getting to, because we don't have a vision for it, and I don't think we have a use for it right now that would be respectful of the time community members would put into something like that.
So the one other thing that I'll elaborate on from the memo that I provided in the packet, and it is available online, Paul, if you could post a link to that, thank you. The Housing Trust Fund program, so Opportunities Credit Union manages this program for the city, and I met with them recently, and they suggested the city explore an interest rate buy-down grant program in lieu of the current down payment assistance program, which is mostly a loan. So the reasons include, there's now a lot of down payment assistance programs available from other lenders, and a $5,000 loan with only up to $1,000 of that as a grant for qualified applicants is not really enough to help right now in an environment where interest rates have really grown. In the past, down payments might have been the big barrier, now currently it's interest rates. And to that end, interest rates are the current barrier. So the Housing Commission is interested in discussing that further. So at some point, council might see that as a proposed program change. Opportunities will be discussing with that proposal with Housing Commission at a future meeting. And that's all I had on the housing update, if there's any questions.
That was just going to be my question, is that does sound, the interest buy down sounds really interesting, and if there doesn't sound like there's anything needed from council at this time?
At this time, correct, yeah.
Okay.
The Housing Commission needs to dig into some of the details more before we would have, something strategic to say to you all.
do want to say, like, I recently reviewed the Housing Trust Fund single-family homeowner incentive that was designed, and I think there was years and years of work that was put into it, and an immense number of meetings, community meetings, housing staff, city staff, members of the community, and just, it's one of those things where you look at it with fresh eyes and you're like, like, at this point, it feels like there's such a demand, there's such a need, and yet the utilization of the program is so low. So that, to me, that indicates there are barriers to access to the intent, and that there's ample opportunity for improvement. So I just want to advocate that I also very much support some changes in the near future as one of our near-term priorities for the Housing Commission, and hopefully for city staff to navigate. And hopefully we're able to get some support from partners, and it doesn't take too long to make some positive changes that are, within the realm of comfort, in that it broadens up our degree of comfort with some more risk, but at the same time it doesn't, put us at any degree of concern with our legal counsel, I guess. But I wanted to mention that. I've already mentioned that to the mayor. Another housing element that I do.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I took one call, so it's just anecdotal at this point, but it'll be interesting now that we're publicizing my name more broadly as the contact for this, if I'll have more opportunities for these conversations. Also, I think opportunities is probably getting some of that direct feedback as well, so when Prabin comes, he can talk to those. The anecdote that I have is I went through the whole program. They're like, oh, great. Oh, it's a loan. I'm not doing this. And I said, oh, well, why is that? And the person said that it's so expensive to do these improvements now. They just can't afford it. I'm not saying that's literally the case, but they're just not interested in a loan because it's just not quite enough help, and the whole thing is they're looking to reduce their costs as much as possible. Materials cost a lot. So to your point about balancing risk, the other piece of it is like, where's the sweet spot between enabling more activity in the community without completely depleting the fund? Because we're not feeding money into it right now. That's noted as a stretch budget item. I referred to it last week.
Right.
There's no way to replenish that fund, which is why it's designed mostly as a loan program right now.
Right.
And I think it's important to recognize that this has been a tiered rollout where down payment assistance has received the most attention and advertising for the longest period of time. Housing improvement has really been advertised to selective. It's been advertised primarily through the building registry, as I understand it, the public building registry, and not broadly advertised. And then we haven't been advertising the core loans. That was for even less time. So as I remember our progression of rollout, and Elaine, please correct me if I've got any of this wrong, but we started with the DP, with the down payment assistance program. We then started out promoting the HIP through the housing improvement part through our existing connections with landlords. And then we started talking more broadly about the construction rehabilitation grants, which were larger pockets of money. So I just don't feel that we've had a lot of time to evaluate like the success, and it might be anecdotal that people are looking and saying it's a loan, I'm not going to do it, it's not high enough value, and the solution is just to up the total loan amount potentially. Could be enough, or material cost comes down in 6 months and it all of a sudden becomes feasible. So I think there's that aspect too of like, what have we actually promoted? And the Housing Commission agreed with the recommendation of staff to not do like a full-throated, all the time, everywhere promotion of all three programs. We're really seeking to target promotion of these different programs through partners. So I think like we have to weigh that too as we see whether this is performing or not in the short 3 months that it's been kind of publicly noticed.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the timing was that deliberate, but I think functionally that is close enough to what happened.
Well, it seemed deliberate when I looked at it at the time, but maybe it was just the way it happened. I can't remember.
Also on housing, I do want to emphasize a program that was just announced to the media this week is the Weatherization Repayment Assistance Program. which will be managed by the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. It basically allows for weatherization of renter-occupied homes, and ensuring that reducing the barrier that often comes up where a renter might want to make some energy efficiency improvements, but the requirement of access to the incentive programs is by having the landlord basically pursue those opportunities themselves. So this is just one more recent opportunity to reduce barriers to access for weatherization programs. So certainly encourage the Housing Commission to look into that, and for our city staff to look into opportunities to promote it as well.
Absolutely. I was expecting you to tell us about it.
Glad I didn't disappoint.
Any more questions or comments on this housing update? Any questions from members of the public? Okay. Let's move to item G, which was item F, the Housing Initiative Director position.
Yeah, so you approved what was planned to be a 40-hour per week position at your November 7th meeting. A lot of things happened that meeting, with 10 of the hours paid from the general fund and 30 from the community development fund, not to be confused with the community services department. Staff posted this position and received a few applications. Then, as I've been mentioning, the FY24 budget picture became clearer, and I thought, oh, we're going to have to try and find cuts anywhere we can, especially from currently unfilled positions, with some exceptions. Anyway, so we had taken the job posting down. So we're proposing this and wanted to formalize it here, at least, even though you haven't made decisions. If you're ready to allow this posting, then we could fill it earlier. If it turns out that you want to increase the hours, that could complicate matters. So I recognize this is an awkward ask, but that's the balance of the situation. We could wait until, March or January to post, and obviously there's some challenges to that. And I'll mention that the Housing Commission was consulted about the change. Jim can chime in if he disagrees with my summary here, that, they felt it was certainly better than what they've got now, which is nobody dedicated. Of course, they're not thrilled about it, but it would be worth doing at 30. Had some concerns about it being attractive. There was some back and forth about that. That's all I've got.
So the ask is, the position description hasn't really changed. It's, do we want to approve this at the 30 hours right now so it can be posted? Or we can delay that. We could do it in the next meeting. We could do it after we have our final budget discussion. Because if we approve this now, I think we're committing to, in our final budget decisions, saying this 30-hour position is included.
Have you received comments from Councilor Renner on this?
He just asked about the grant position that Aurora mentioned, so I'm actually going to direct him to follow up with Emily and Sherry earlier.
Okay.
I had a question about the delta for this cost. In the budget worksheet that we got, it was a $27,000 save to take 10 hours down, which makes this almost $130,000 position if you scale up, but it's fully benefited at 30 or 40, so I'm kind of struggling with how that 10 hours is worth $27,000.
Angela, if you would, please.
It's not just the 10 hours, it's 1/4 of the entire position, and benefits included were assigned to the general fund. So the benefits that would be incurred still at 30 hours would shift to the community development fund.
So we were
and that would only be for benefits that are fixed in nature, which is health insurance. Everything else is salary-based.
So is 1/4 of the benefits and 1/4 of the salary?
That's correct. It's allocated out using an auto labor distribution in our payroll system. So 25% of all pay and deductions get allocated to the general fund right now. So the number in that cut sheet is representative of 25% of the total position benefits included.
And what's the annual salary rate for this position as posted?
I'm not certain what they're posting. I can tell you what is included in the budget for FY24.
That would be at 30 though. So I think what we had in the last,
I can tell you the hourly rate.
okay.
That position is budgeted in FY24 at $33.73 an hour. And that is a grade 5, step 6.
Okay.
So what's in the document for tonight said grade 5 at 28.83. So with the decrease in hours, are you also decreasing, I guess, minimum qualifications?
So, a couple things. I did this without the benefit Angela, so it could be wrong. The other thing is this is FY23, so hopefully I did it right, and it's because the difference is because this is FY23 and Angela just reported FY24.
Gotcha.
Yeah, FY23 grade 5 step 1 is 2883. Per our non-union personnel policy that was approved by council, we generally hire somebody meeting the bare minimum of qualifications for a position at a step 1. If they have additional experience or education that applies to the position, we can increase them in the pay scale up to a grade 5, which is why, or a step 5, which is why I budgeted for a step 6 next year. If we hire that position this year before April, it would be eligible for a step increase next fiscal year.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
There isn't any hand waving when it comes to Angela. It's all, all backed up.
Thanks for going into that detail, Angela. It was a question that had come up at the Housing Commission about what the cost of that was and what we were saving. So I appreciate being able to walk through it with you.
Yeah, and if we do have an applicant that fits our needs, that doesn't need to come in at a higher pay rate, that could be a savings to the budget next fiscal year, but we don't want to budget for something less than the most that we could spend. That way, if we have that ideal candidate that meets all of those things, that we can afford to bring them on board.
I feel reluctant to make this decision now.
I mean, I feel like we should commit to a 40-hour position, and even if it's just for a year, we just decided not to spend $30,000 in our reserve funds. And I know that's not the right way to think about it, but this is an investment that our community has been waiting for a while, and the Housing Commission, and to paraphrase, has been struggling for most of a year, and we see that we can't get work done that we all agreed is a priority. So it's hard to imagine that changing, and I think that providing a high-quality director position at 40 hours a week is appropriate. I don't know that we will get the same quality of candidate at 30 hours a week. Maybe we'll find that person who just that's a good amount of pay and extra flexibility in time, but this is a position that has a lot to do now and probably will still have a lot to do in 2 years. I have a hard time imagining that we couldn't use that time, or I don't know. It feels like a decision that we could wait for, but I think we should either just move forward at 30 or move forward at 40 and commit to that. That's my opinion.
I would be willing to move forward at 30, and I would actually ask, I don't know if you have anything anecdotally to share, Angela, but in my time, it seems like there have been a number of positions that have started in the 30 range and then eventually worked up to 40, and that has been successful with keeping people.
Yeah, and that's a much easier lift than going from, say, a 28-hour-a-week position up to a benefited position. It's that jump to benefits that's really been the major hurdle. Adding in a couple of hours every year is incrementally a way that we could potentially increase to 40 hours over time, and is much more affordable and absorbable within the tax rate increase that's still affordable to this community.
My concern about advertising, locking the community into a 40-hour position right now is that if you look at the cut and add sheet, I'm not saying it's going to stay that way, but absent any other consensus from council at this time, we could be committing the community to a disproportionate tax rate increase in FY25 because there's not a lot of room left over in TIF to pay for. So it's like we could absolutely make a case, each of us, for all those things that we're cutting and that they don't make sense. So just want to remind folks about the potential tax implications next year.
Yeah, I wouldn't be comfortable with advancing a 40-hour position based on current recommendations, but I might be for a 30-hour one.
Is there a reason 32 wasn't considered? I mean, that would be 4 days.
We're trying to get to 5% tax rate increase.
Also, 10 hours were included in the general fund. Having a split where only 2 hours falls in the general fund is a little harder on the system. It's an awkward percentage.
Quarter. 10 hours a quarter, 40 hours a week. Is there any point in time where the city has voted down a tax proposal?
Well, in the last 10 years, the increases have been 2.17%. So I don't know that that's
Not in the recent past.
Not in the recent past. So I've been with the city 17 years, and I know it's anecdotal, but not since I've been with the city has the budget failed.
Okay, so there's low risk at putting this in the next budget, hiring for a position that may not be approved in the budget.
What's the highest tax rate increase in your tenure, Angela?
That would be the 5.6% that was when we added Main Street and the pool, and we had those very specific items, and that budget was sold to the public on those items coming on board.
Okay, just wanted to have a baseline,
Absolutely.
point of reference.
Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned this at the last meeting, I probably did, but the school budget is also in the same boat as us, and so voters are potentially being presented with substantial tax rate increase this year.
Well, I think if it's a choice between 30 hours a week and nothing, I think we need to move forward with 30 hours a week, personally. I think we need to have something. I don't think we can wait till March. And that's my...
You can make a motion if you want to.
I could. See if anyone wants to argue back up to 40. But I'll move that we approve this position description at 30 hours a week as described.
Do I hear a second?
Sorry, I'm trying to organize all these thoughts, and it does seem very uncomfortable to have to do this now. On the flip side, I agree that this is urgent and we kind of needed it like a year ago. So the sooner we can get someone in there, the better. However, I'm worried that we're going to spend time and money trying to recruit for a position that we can't fill. And I do appreciate that this is a benefits eligible position, which makes it more interesting. Is there a chance, I don't know. I'm trying to think.
We could revisit this at our next meeting if folks are not comfortable making a decision tonight.
If we made the decision tonight, when could it be posted?
I would think tomorrow,
Okay.
because we've already been advertising. It would just be changing the hours. I don't know how many people look for jobs around this time of year. I mean, I'm just thinking about like what would be the cost of not posting it now. Yeah, it's that much more time because it is going to take a month or two to actually get someone in at a minimum. So
Mayor, I'll second.
We've got a motion by Jen and a second by Bryn. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Did you respond to her?
Yes.
Okay. The motion carries. Thank you. Let's move on to item H. This is on for discussion or approval, a housing trust fund application for down payment assistance.
yes, so very exciting. Gosh, what do I have here? So the Housing Commission voted to recommend you approve this loan. They are not eligible for any portion of this as a grant. They meet all the criteria. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about this second ever down payment assistance application, the first one that is still live because the first one was withdrawn.
Are there any questions from councilors? Any questions from members of the public? Do I hear a motion to approve the housing trust fund application?
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Jen, second by Aurora. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Hooray.
On to item J. This is the legislative priorities memo. I think we discussed this 2 meetings ago. I have in red changes in response to the conversation we had at our last meeting. So I added in, we talked about not wanting the rental registry support to be a priority necessarily because we don't need it in, we have one in Winooski, but we would like to support it for others. So I have added language about it in here connected to the existing priorities versus having it stand out. You'll see that in bullet number 2 on page 2. We wanted to add more content related to substance use disorder and opioid treatment. Most of this language all of this language came from my meeting with the Mayor's Coalition and efforts that they might be getting behind. And I just realized this last night. I was also supposed to include a statement about supporting the legislative study on safe injection sites. I neglected to put that in here, so I can add that after the fact. At the bottom of page 2, these are edits we actually talked about in meeting. And that's it. So if this meets what we discussed previously and you'll approve it, then I will quickly distribute this. This week I will distribute it to our senators, reps, and relevant committee chairs. Oh, and I'll also have this for the Friday event with Mayor Lumberger.
I think you do. I see study safe
Did I put it in there?
yeah. So I think
Okay, good.
think that's good. I did receive one comment that it sounds like they might be alternative term being used as overdose prevention sites. So it sounds like
I
either
appreciate
or
that.
would work. Include both. I'm not sure, but that's the only thing I had.
Okay, I could not see that language in this yesterday.
Thread
Oh, and I
thought.
forgot one thing. I took out the bullet about the cannabis tax. After talking to the Mayor's Coalition, nobody else is really pushing on that, so didn't seem relevant for us to do.
There is a member in the community that has their hand raised.
Sure, Marielle.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I don't know what that cannabis discussion point was, but I'd be interested to hear about it. I do have a few recommendations around the substance use disorder piece specifically. And to bring this back, just for context, I'm a Winooski partnership coach, and I do substance use prevention as my day job. Very passionate about that, and I also feel reserved in providing comment as I'm not a resident of Winooski. And I feel compelled to bring this all back to the youth interventionist position that was discussed previously, and urge you to consider the connection with prevention in both presenting your legislative priorities and in thinking about the youth interventionist position, which is, funding of that role is a substance use disorder intervention itself. It's on the prevention side, obviously, but it is something really worthwhile considering. But that's maybe something that in this legislative memo you could be encouraged, you potentially could encourage the agency of education, or I'm not sure who, to include that kind of position in schools, in communities, based on some equity considerations. I would guess mostly income. We know that income is a really significant predictor of development of substance use disorders. It's also a predictor of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which are predictors of substance use disorders. And the first CDC recommended strategy to minimize ACEs is to increase household economic stability, and would be recommending this kind of position is based on income considerations or wealth considerations. I did have another point, two more points. One related to cannabis, which is that we know cannabis has a negative mental health effect on the population. And when I say that, I really don't mean on individual folks, but the population at large. When we look at large studies, we see the development of heightened anxiety and mood disorders, especially among adolescents and young adults, so those under 25. And I would encourage legislators to engage with the CCB, the Cannabis Control Board, to model public health impacts of cannabis retail density limits. So that would be one more consideration. And lastly, on substance use disorders, I would encourage legislators to consider a statewide pilot wastewater testing, so that we can see what substances are in our wastewater in what Dustin and Burlington were doing for a little while, and a few others obviously had wastewater pilots as part of COVID-19 intervention, but it might be something that the state could gather a lot of real-time data from on a topic that is often stigmatized, so it's hard to gather accurate survey kind of data on really what substances people are using and to what degree. So those are my recommendations, and happy to respond to any questions about those.
Could you go back to, what were you saying about the cannabis? What did you want legislators to engage the CCB on?
To consider a retail density limit. That means having a certain number of retailers per population. And that's important, particularly for Burlington and Winooski, because we currently are and will continue to be overexposed to cannabis compared to other places in the state, just by the nature of population and where economic capital is concentrated in the state. And that we know from other prevention science has an impact on especially youth initiation of a product, but it also has an impact on adults trying to not use or quit or stay in recovery. And all of that I bring back. I think this is all important in relation to substance use disorders, because there's so much polysubstance use, and things can get complicated quickly in terms of treatment, in terms of substances interacting with each other that may not be specifically a consideration for cannabis, but it is sadly something that we would see in autopsy reports of overdoses in our region frequently. We would see THC levels. So I'm just throwing that out there as one among many public health interventions that could be considered for mitigating cannabis impact, but be happy to talk with you maybe outside the public meeting about other potential strategies to consider.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I would love to follow up at another time. I will say, and our zoning administrator can correct me if I'm wrong here, but from what I recall, so we have one retail cannabis establishment in Winooski. From what I recall, because they can't operate in a building that has like a federally backed mortgage, that business owner had a really tough time finding a location in Winooski where they could. And so I do think there's one thing that we might not have to worry about as much, because so much of our properties are, they're not a standalone business building that is owned outright.
Right. And then,
but I guess, yeah. Sorry. I was just going to say, I think we probably don't have as much of a concern here, but I can see how that would be a general, like how this could be a general board member.
sure. And it may also, in terms of economic equity, be a concern for the state at large of, how to evenly distribute cannabis tax dollars, cannabis impact across the state. And so if there were something like a density limit, which is by population, it would have the same impact across, it would have an equitable impact across towns and municipalities. But again, happy to talk more about that offline. And thank you for sharing this memo.
Thank you. I see Andy's hand is raising it too.
Hi, thanks. I was also curious to hear more about the cannabis tax that you were just talking about.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I just also wanted to thank you for sharing this. I really appreciate the part about displacement and housing instability, number one. I think that's great, and I just appreciate it, so thank you.
Thanks. So we had an item on here that I removed in last year legislative session, the last 2 years. There was a lot of advocacy from communities. So the state collects like 14% excise tax on retail cannabis that they keep. They do not cost share that with, or they give us, Anyhow, if they're giving us anything, it's like 1 or 2%, and there was advocacy, and I want to say it's 0. There was advocacy from many towns and the League of Cities and Towns to try to get a bigger share of that, to put towards local prevention and proactive engagement efforts. But over the last 2 years, it didn't go anywhere in the legislature. There doesn't seem to be interest in taking it up, and since other towns aren't pushing for that, we didn't see value in keeping that on our top priorities list, because if we're the only voice asking for it, it's almost certain that going to happen.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I do hope that if that ever changes, as I would really hope it would for municipalities, because as we were just talking about with the budget, it would be great to have some more tax revenue coming in from cannabis industries that are going to be blooming here and doing really well. So thanks for explaining that. Appreciate it.
Certainly. Thank you both for engaging. Are there additional thoughts from council or questions? Yeah, remove. Okay. Mary Ellen will reach out to you at some point. But also, we don't meet again until January. We want to get this out to our legislators before the holiday. So, do I have a motion to approve this document as is with one change, the word safe injection site to overdose prevention site?
Sorry, Mayor, this isn't down for approval, so I don't think we can vote on it.
What?
Oh no, did I not? Oh, I'm sorry.
It does not say that on the agenda.
My apologies. You could do it by consensus and then have a formal vote next time so that you could still share it with
Yeah.
understanding that will be approved.
Is there particular language I need to follow for consensus?
You could just ask each member individually. There's there's not actually a procedure for that.
Okay.
I mean, you are our
Um,
voice, and I think this
Yeah.
is reflecting the changes that were previously discussed and has been warned, so no change, I mean, there's the one change of wording that doesn't seem particularly substantive. It's a good change, but it's not substantively different. I think I'm fine with you
I'm
as the
comfortable
voice
with
of the
that.
council going forward without a motion.
Okay,
Agreed.
thank you. You will see this on for approval at our next meeting
Thank you.
agenda. So that brings us to item J, the appointment of Jim as our airport commissioner.
Yeah, so at your last meeting, you discussed wanting a member of council to represent the city on the Burlington Airport Commission, but the meeting time didn't work for most of you because it's during regular work hours. Vice Mayor James Duncan offered to serve for a couple of months until hopefully a different solution could be found, meaning some ideas that were floated were perhaps the Airport Commission could change its meeting time, or if the Winooski representative rotated among council members. I'm recalling the mayor said that you would try to get more information from the airport director about meeting times. If the time of day doesn't change, you might discuss the second idea or direct staff to advertise for a community member. This is in addition to appointing Vice Mayor Duncan tonight.
Yeah, so I did reach out to the commission chair and the aviation director and shared with them our challenges. I haven't heard back yet on the potential to do the time change. And so we can appoint Jim for now so that we have representation there. We know he'll be off come town meeting day, so this is a 2-month appointment, right? And when we have more information, we can decide if we want to appoint a different member of council, if we can do that, or if we need to move to advertising. Are there any questions, concerns?
I just want to thank Eric for continuing to attend. I wasn't able to attend the meeting on Wednesday last week following our meeting, so I'm appreciative of continuing to stay informed of that on behalf of the city, of what's happening there.
Any questions from members of the public? Okay. Do I have a motion to appoint Jim Duncan as our airport commissioner?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Bryn, second by Aurora. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I don't know, Jim, you can vote on that or not.
Can I vote?
I don't know. But I said aye as well, so the motion carries. Okay, that brings us to the end of this evening's agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Bryn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Feel better.